Chapter 747. One move to dominate the entire world. The next day, Yun Nuoshing and the rest stood in front of the shop behind the mansion. The shop had been renovated and looked quite good. In the morning, many people gradually woke up. The street that the shop faced was one of the busiest in the city of burning flames. The rent for the mansion was rather high, but to Yun Nuoshing, who was used to being rich, this price was nothing. The sun had just lit up the sky, and the city of burning flames came alive. People appeared on the street one after another. It was only dawn, but many people passed by. Most of them were stunned when they saw the shop that had suddenly opened. However, when they saw the few girls standing at the door, their eyes instantly widened. They couldn't even walk anymore. They all stopped and stared in shock, causing a few exaggerated traffic accidents, recycling old array tools, weapons, cauldrons. No. Repairing array tools, weapons, and arrays. Refining array tools and weapons at the same time. Starting from 10,000 gold for immortal rank, 10,000 gold for demon rank, and 300,000 gold for demigod rank. Prepare your own materials. Special treatment under special circumstances. There are only things you can think of, but nothing you can't refine. Looking at the signboard in front of the shop, Yun Nuoshing nodded in satisfaction. Then, he looked at the last line of words and hesitated. Isn't the last line a little too exaggerated? Xian and the rest nodded silently. Yun Nuoshing scratched his head in embarrassment. Just as they thought that he would change it, he said calmly, "Forget it. I'm too lazy to change it. Let's just do it." Xian and the rest. A few meters away from the shop was a small tavern. The business inside was booming as well. Regardless of the weather, the tavern was open from morning till night. The fine wine inside was unique and attracted countless people from the nearby street. It was a rather good tavern in the city of burning flames. There wasn't much in Yun Nuoshing's shop. There were only a few potted plants, a long table, and a few chairs. There were a few calligraphy and paintings hanging on the wall. It looked very simple and crude. Yun Nuoshing looked around and saw Xian and the other girls. She couldn't help but tease. "It's indeed a bit shabby, but girl, just stand there and you'll be able to see the scenery of our restaurant." Xian rolled her eyes at him, stroked her long hair and said softly, "You only read books last night. Can you handle it?" I know the theoretical knowledge. As for how to refine it, it's just refining anyway. Once I get it, I'll know. If it's just a problem with the spirit design, then it's not a problem." Yun Nuoshing chuckled. She didn't feel nervous at all. Although she had done some last-minute research, it was enough. Moreover, it's the first day of business. There shouldn't be many people coming. Yun Nuoshing looked at the bright sky. There were more and more people on the street. He couldn't help but sigh. He wanted to divert his attention and see if he could get some inspiration from studying arrays and weapons. His goal was still to take down the Cloudfire secret land. Opening a shop was just a side activity for him to rest and learn. "Do you want us to go out and receive customers? Be our signboard?" Xian smiled and rubbed his shoulder. Yun Nuoshing coughed dryly. Then, he pretended to be calm and said, "Forgive me, but our shop doesn't require such conditions." Xian looked at him with a smile, which made him a little uncomfortable. When she saw him looking away, she smiled and looked at Feng Er and the others. This guy was reluctant. Although there were many people on this street, and many passers-by would take a look at the shop that suddenly opened, not many people were interested. They just took a look and left. Yun Nuoshing and the others didn't do anything to open the shop. They simply opened the door and hung a sign outside. Therefore, after half a day, not a single customer stepped into the shop. Yun Nuoshing wasn't in a hurry. He didn't make a living by opening a shop. He just came here to play with a half-interested attitude. He treated it as a life experience. The tavern next to it was much better than this cold shop. Even though they were separated by 2 walls and an alley, they could still hear the clamor inside. There were countless people coming and going, which made many people take a second look at this cold shop. However, it was just a second look. Xian and the others were bored and wanted to go shopping. However, after secretly glancing at Yun Nuoxing, who was reading quietly, they gave up the idea. They sat with him in the shop and took the books in his pendant to read. Just after noon, Yi Shi, who couldn't sit still, dragged Xian to the tavern next door to buy wine. They brought back several jars of wine, and all of them were opened. The fragrance of the wine almost suffocated Yun Nuoxing. However, what surprised Yun Nuoxing was that, after the two girls went to buy a few jars of wine, they actually brought back a group of people. They were dressed luxuriously and seemed to be the young masters of some powerful forces in the city. Not only did this group of people squeeze into the shop, but Yun Nuoxing could also see the onlookers outside through the window. This made Yun Nuoxing speechless. He glanced at Xian. She was also carefully looking at Yun Nuoxing and cutely sticking out her little tongue. Needless to say, he knew that with this girl's ability to cause trouble, this group of people must have been attracted by her beauty. This girl could attract a group of people just by buying wine. Slowly closing the book, Yun Nuoxing sat quietly on the chair without any intention of getting up. She looked at the group of people who entered the shop and said softly, "May I know what business you have with us? Our shop takes care of all the maintenance and refining of array tools and weapons. Is there anything we can help you with?" The group of young men who walked into the shop were slightly surprised when they saw that although the shop was very big, it seemed very empty because there were no furnishings. They looked at Xian, Feng'er and Little Bing Er with interest and then fixed their eyes on Yun Nuoxing. A glimmer of light flashed in their eyes and they smiled. "Young lady, are you a blacksmith?" Yun Nuoxing's face twitched slightly, and she nodded casually. "I've studied it." Hee. The young man smiled and reached out to stop the person behind him who wanted to speak. Then, he thought for a while and took out an item from his pocket. He gently placed it in front of Yun Nuoxing and said, "This is a 4th-grade demon rank weapon. It has been used for a long time, and the array inside is worn out. Young lady, can you repair it?" Yun Nuoxing glanced at him and was a little surprised that this young man didn't act rashly. Moreover, from his identity, he didn't seem to care about a 4th-grade demon rank weapon. It was obvious that he came for them. However, she didn't say anything. Since he was a guest, it would be fine as long as he didn't cause trouble. Her eyelids drooped slightly, and her slender hand slowly stroked a small bell that was about a foot long on the table. This bell was black, and there were strange patterns engraved on the surface of the bell. There were also some dents as if it had been dented by a violent impact. Moreover, the array inside seemed to be half destroyed. It wasn't impossible to repair it, but the cost of repairing it was enough to buy a better one. The evil spirit looked at it for a while, but Yun Nuoxing smiled faintly. She raised her head and looked at the young man. She said with a faint smile, "The weapon that young master has taken out isn't a 4th-grade demon rank weapon, but a demon rank weapon. Moreover, the reason for its damage isn't because of overuse, but because it has been worn down by time. This small bell should be a demon rank weapon that has been abandoned for more than 1,000 years. However, you have renovated its appearance, making it look no different from a newly damaged one." When he heard Yun Nuoxing directly expose the nature of the small bell, the young man looked at Yun Nuoxing in surprise. His eyes rolled, and then he smiled and cupped his hands together. "Young lady, you have good eyesight." "That's right. This bell was obtained from a relic. It's a high-grade demon rank weapon, and that relic has existed for more than 1,000 years. When Yun Nuoxing heard this, she curled her lips in an unconcerned manner. That lovely manner caused the young man's eyes to involuntarily emit some fire. After which, he laughed softly and said, "I was rude when I tested young miss earlier. I wonder if young miss can repair it? I can pay a high price." Yun Nuoxing lowered her head and looked at the small bell that was so badly damaged that it was unbearable to look at. She was a little speechless. However, since it was her first business deal, she could only pinch her nose and accept it. Come and get it tomorrow. If there's nothing else, please leave. The main reason was that Yun Nuoshing felt a headache when she saw the green light in the eyes of this group of young men. She could only helplessly ask them to leave. At the same time, she could not help but curse in her heart. It was as though this group of people had never seen a woman before. There was something wrong with their eyes. However, it was no wonder. In an empty shop, there were only 5 young ladies who were worth looking at. These 5 clearly included Yun Nuoshing. If they knew that she was actually a man, it was unknown if they would poke their own eyes out. The group of young men also understood that Yun Nuoshing wanted them to leave. They curled their lips and did not seem to have any intention of paying attention to her. However, the young man who led the group put on a smile that he thought was gentle. He then cupped his hands and gradually left the shop. He was not worried that the small bell would disappear. It was originally a piece of junk. Many blacksmiths would say that it could not be repaired even if they saw it. As for Yun Nuoshing's words, he did not question it. It was not that he did not want to question it, but that he did not want to question it in front of these women. It would make him feel that he was lacking in character. We're leaving just like that? After they were some distance away from the shop, the people behind the young man could not help but mutter. They looked at the elegant young man strangely. When they were in the tavern, he was the one who struck up a conversation with Yun Nuoshing first. In the shop, he was also the one who left first. They could not figure out what he was thinking. It's normal for blacksmiths to be a little arrogant. I didn't expect that little girl who looked like she was only 16 years old to be a blacksmith. The young man smiled. In a new shop, there was nothing inside except for a few girls. If it were not for the sign hanging at the door, perhaps no one would know what they were doing. That little thing is useless. At least it's useless before it's repaired. It's just an excuse to talk to them again. Hee. Hearing this person's words, those young men could not help but click their tongue. This guy was attracted to beauties again. The girls in that room were all top-notch beauties. Would any of them be harmed by him? However, these people's worries were not a problem at all. Because when they entered the room, Feng and the others did not even look at them. This also showed that they did not care at all. The only person they cared about was Yun Nuoshing. If Yun Nuoshing knew what this young man was thinking, she probably would not accept the order and would directly ask him to scram. However, he did not know that. Moreover, since he had accepted this business, he would also seriously repair it. The so-called seriousness was that he would spend 2 hours at night fiddling with it. He found new materials and repaired it. The worn-out little bell was restored to its original state. Even the array inside was restored. His God-ranked soul coupled with the evil spirit I allowed him to observe in detail. Not all complicated arrays could be seen clearly, so this little thing was naturally not a problem for him. What made him curious was that after the little bell was repaired, he could see that it was neither a weapon nor an array tool. It was a key that had reached the demigod rank. A key. After coming out of the forging room, Yun Nuoshing casually threw the little bell to Yi Shi. When the latter heard his words, she was slightly taken aback. She casually caught it and looked at it. She also understood why he said it was a key. The array engraved on the little bell was a kind of array that could be used to unlock or open something. This array was the type that was used to unlock or open something. This array was the type that was used to unlock or open something. Although they were curious, they didn't think too much about it. The next day, they threw this thing to the young man who came to the shop early. This time, he was the only one who came, and it was obvious at first glance that he had dressed up meticulously. The luxurious clothes and the hair accessories showed that he had come with intentions without needing anyone to explain. However, regarding this, Yun Nuoshing and the others did not take a second look. The young man was also not in a hurry. He picked up the little bell and looked at it. The smile on his face instantly stiffened. Including the cost of the materials, a total of 10,000 gold. Thank you. Seeing him stiffen, Yun Nuoshing didn't know why he was so stiff, and said to himself. The young man was stunned. Then, he stared at her very seriously for a long time. After a while, he smiled faintly. He casually took out a space ring and placed it on the table. After thinking for a while, he gently put down a gold card and said with a smile, Miss, here's 1,000,000. I'll have to trouble you with the things inside. I still have something to do, so I'll take my leave. After saying that, he politely cupped his hands and smiled faintly at Xian and the others. Then, he turned around and walked out of the shop unhurriedly. When he walked half a street away, he turned around and saw that there was no movement in the shop. Only then did he quickly run away. Yun Nuoshing reached out and grabbed the space ring. After casually looking inside for a while, she could not help but say, the things inside are placed casually. They shouldn't be anything important. Moreover, they're all pitifully rotten things. A few of them are so rotten that they're incurable. It's most likely a bargaining chip that he used to get in touch with you. However, he suddenly realized that he had something to do and just happened to throw it away. Yishi took a sip of tea and said, Who cares? Since it's a business deal, just accept it. One day should be enough. Yun Nuoshing smiled and took the gold card. She smiled and said, The first bucket of gold in life. Yes, yes. Chapter 748. In the forging room, a purple-red flame was surging in the furnace. Vast soul power turned into thin threads and invaded the formation tools and weapons in the flames, repairing the formations inside. Occasionally, 1 or 2 pieces of metal would be thrown in to repair the damaged areas. If other blacksmiths were watching, they would be so shocked that their tongues would fall out. Yun Nuoshing was repairing 2 formation tools and weapons at the same time. This was even more difficult than refining 2 divine-grade weapons at the same time. She had to stably divide 1 strand of soul power into 2 strands and accurately transmit the information back. At the same time, she couldn't misinterpret the information. Even a Grandmaster Blacksmith wouldn't dare to do this kind of multitasking. A Grandmaster Blacksmith has become a repairman. Yishi sat on the edge of the forging table and swung her legs. Looking at the busy Yun Nuoshing, she couldn't help but say with pity, Big brother Nuo, your talent is crying. Ahem. Yun Nuoshing coughed dryly and said, It's all the same. When a swordsman can't find a kitchen knife, he can only draw the sword at his waist to cut vegetables. But wouldn't it be more attractive if you hang up the signboard of Can Forge 7th-grade weapons? Although there are many people who doubt it, there might be people who come to take a look. After the fame spreads, people will know that there really is a 7th-grade blacksmith grandmaster here. Ziyen was sitting on a small stool at the side. Her slender and perfect jade legs were crossed, and her jade hand was supporting her chin. She was looking at the serious Yun Nuoshing, and her beautiful eyes were twinkling with splendor. The little star who was concentrating on something really looked very attractive. But a Grandmaster Blacksmith is a human resource. It's very popular everywhere. When the time comes, people will come to find me, right? I don't want to deal with those troubles. Yun Nuoshing tilted her head and glanced at Xian. She then turned back and focused on repairing the formation tools in the furnace. From time to time, she would condense her soul power into a heavy hammer and lightly hit it. Did you get anything? Feng'er asked gently. No. Yun Nuoshing shook his head helplessly. He thought that by looking at other things and diverting his attention, he would be able to quickly think of something that would help him overcome the hurdle he was currently facing. However, it had only been a day or 2, and there was still plenty of time. He was not in a hurry and was in a good mood. After refining for a while, Yun Nuoshing seemed to have thought of something. Without turning her head, she said softly, Girl, you're about to advance to the demigod level, right? Xian, who was looking at him in a daze, paused for a moment, then nodded and said, I'm at the peak of the demon rank. I think I'll be able to break through to the demigod rank in a few days. As soon as she said this, Yun Nuoshing and Yi Shi's expressions changed slightly. Yun Nuoshing's face was a little bitter, but she didn't think too much about it. After all, he was in such a state. Yi Shi, on the other hand, was a little happy. It had only been a little more than a month since the last challenge, and this girl had advanced 2 realms in a row, reaching the peak of the demon rank. This had a lot to do with Xian's talent. Originally, after reaching the demon rank, one's cultivation should get slower and slower, but this girl did the opposite. The most important point was that she had always been by Yun Nuoshing's side, and the resonance between the 5 elements body and the spiritual godly body allowed her to cultivate very quickly. At that time, she had also eaten a Qilin moon, and the godly medicine's effect had been changing her potential and body. It was understandable for her to have such a cultivation speed. If Yun Nuoshing cultivated normally, she would have already reached the 3rd cycle of the demigod rank, but he could only hold it in. As if seeing Yun Nuoshing's gloomy face, Xian wanted to comfort her, but after thinking about it, he changed the topic and said with a smile, "Little star, I want to go to the southern ice realm to take a look." This sudden change of topic startled Yun Nuoshing, but then she nodded with a smile. "Okay, the southern ice realm will be added to the waiting list. As for when to go, well, you can decide, or it depends on the situation." Xian smiled. When they changed the topic, Yun Nuoshing would temporarily put the previous matter aside. It wasn't that he had forgotten, but he still remembered it. He just didn't mention it. Half a day passed quietly, and the efficiency was much faster than expected. As the night approached, Yun Nuoshing repaired the 8 things in the space ring. When he casually asked what plans they had for the night. "Shopping. Daddy, I want to eat." The girls gave 2 answers at the same time, making Yun Nuoshing speechless. However, he didn't refuse and agreed. After casually tidying up the shop, he brought the girls out. At night, Burning Flame City was bustling as well. On both sides of a street that was not too wide, there were many shops. Before one could walk to the end of the street, one could smell all sorts of fragrances wafting out from the food street. Just the smell of the food made one's stomach growl uncontrollably. As expected, compared to the restaurants, the food street is more enjoyable. Eating from one end of the street to the other, this is the happiness of a foodie. Standing at the street entrance, the street was filled with lights. Although it wasn't crowded to the point of being crowded, it was already very lively. Little Bing suddenly sniffled, and her blue-gold eyes lit up. Without saying a word, she grabbed Yun Nuoshing and began to run with her long, jade-like legs. "Ah!" Being suddenly pulled, Yun Nuoshing also cried out in surprise. He quickly grabbed Ziyan's jade-like hand and then dragged her to run. Ziyan also cried out in surprise and pulled Feng Er. Feng Er carried Yi Shi, and the 5 of them formed a long strip and ran on the snack street. That scene made all the passers-by stare with their eyes wide open. After a while, Bing Er rushed into a shop with the few of them. Without another word, she sat at the biggest table. Then, she stared at the shop with her shiny Mei Mao, full of anticipation. The shop wasn't very big. There were only 6 small rectangular tables, and each table could only fit 5 people. There were warm crystals hanging on the walls, and the shop was empty. Similar to the bleakness of autumn, the shop was cold and cheerless. "Oh, customers are here. What would you like to order? I recommend our shop's signature medicinal cuisine. Just one bite will keep you warm for the whole autumn and winter." A person suddenly appeared behind the stove. It was a middle-aged man with a clean apron around his waist. It seemed to be new, and his face was full of smiles. There were no waiters in the shop, so the middle-aged man was probably the boss. Yun Nuoshing smiled and said, "Then let's order the medicinal cuisine. Give me 5 servings first." "Oh right, no celery." "Okay," the boss answered. In just a few minutes, 5 servings of medicinal cuisine, 5 bowls of white rice, and a side dish made of green vegetables filled the small table to the brim. Hee, it's rare for a few young ladies to come to this shabby shop, so I'll give you a portion of my secret spiritual dish, the boss said with a smile. After putting down the food, he turned around and went back to the stove. He squatted under the stove as if he was doing something. Yun Nuoshing took a deep breath, and a hint of spiritual light flashed through her eyes. There were some spiritual herbs in this medicinal cuisine. Perhaps they weren't very old, but the rich spiritual energy was enough to increase a cultivator's cultivation level. However, at this moment, he didn't care about the spiritual energy. He just smelled the fragrance of the food. He quickly raised his chopsticks and said with a smile, "I'll eat first as a sign of respect." After saying that, he suddenly buried his head into the pot and the white rice. A satisfied expression appeared on his face as he ate the meat of an unknown demonic beast with the white rice. He raised his head and took a deep breath with his eyes closed, as if he was about to ascend to heaven. When Ziyen and the others saw his exaggerated expression, they also smiled faintly. They carefully picked up the medicinal ingredients in the jar and slowly placed them into their small mouth. Their elegant chewing and swallowing caused Yun Nuoshing's pretty face to turn slightly red. She hurriedly slowed down her speed. It was such an ordinary shop. The dim light of the crystals, the shabby tables and chairs, and the delicious food that made people drool. The warm light and steam filled the shop, and the atmosphere was warm and harmonious. "Boss, give me 10 more servings in batches." Yun Nuoshing greeted the boss. He was distracted for a moment, and when he came back to his senses, he found that little Bing Er and Feng had already finished the food in front of him and reached into his pot. He was speechless. He glanced at the two women, and they were also blushing. However, they still ate the less than half of his remaining food under his gaze. They didn't even leave the bones for him. "Weren't you guys eating very elegantly and slowly just now?" Yun Nuoshing muttered gloomily. "Okay." The person behind the stove responded to the boss's voice. However, after a while, the boss slowly stood up. Yun Nuoshing was a little curious. He couldn't help but walk over and ask, "Is there anything I can help you with?" When the boss saw him suddenly walk over, he was also surprised. Then, he chuckled and said, "It's nothing. It's just that the array tool under the stove is a little broken. It's a little slow because one pot is missing. However, it's not a big deal. There aren't many people anyway." "Array tool? Do you need me to help fix it?" Yun Nuoshing smiled. "Little girl, are you a weapon refiner?" When he heard this, the boss was a little surprised. However, he wasn't too surprised. When he saw the clothes of this group of little girls, he knew that they weren't ordinary people. However, he didn't know why they came to his place to eat. "I know a little." Yun Nuoshing nodded. He was too lazy to change the way he addressed her. In any case, they weren't people who spent a lot of time together. It didn't matter whether he changed the way he addressed her or not. After he finished speaking, he walked behind the stove and squatted down. He looked at the array tool under the stove. The boss also stepped aside and focused on watching Yun Nuoshing fiddle with it. "Okay." After a while, Yun Nuoshing stood up, clapped her hands and smiled. "Thank you, little girl." The boss chuckled and said, "Go and sit for a while. I'll send it to you in a while. Make it big." "Thank you, boss." Yun Nuoshing also responded with a smile. Not long after, the boss brought over a few new earthen jars. They were much more beautiful than the previous ones. Moreover, the spirit energy coming out of the jars was denser than the previous ones. It was obvious that these were spirit herbs of a higher age. The boss chuckled as he looked at Yun Nuoshing and the others, who were eating enthusiastically. His hands were busy with the next set. He couldn't help but sigh. Little girls nowadays can eat too much. After struggling for a while, they added 5 more set. When they were satisfied, the 5 of them left the medicinal cuisine shop. Then, they ran to the snack stall next door and picked up skewers. They also carried rice balls, barbecued meat, and various kinds of magical beast meat in their hand. The spirit energy was dense. Yun Nua's star also fully displayed the style of a foodie. They ate from the street to the end of the street, sweeping away the clouds. Even Ziyan and the others followed suit and ate heartily. In any case, the food that entered their stomachs would quickly be broken down into energy. This energy didn't seem to be particularly abundant. To put it simply, it wasn't easy to eat until they were full, unless it was some medicinal cuisine that was very rich in spiritual energy or the meat of powerful magical beasts. Burp! Zian supported Yun Nuoshing's shoulder. Half of her body was hanging on him. She burped and said softly, "I ate too much." "Too much? I think it's okay." "Well, if you ate too much, take a rest. You can leave later." Yun Nuoshing glanced at her and nodded. When she responded, she buried her head in a piece of golden barbecued meat that was the size of a washbasin. When the people on the side heard this, their cheeks couldn't help but twitch. They looked at the spoils of war beside Yun Nuoshing and the others. There were hundreds of plates and bowls piled up. These girls must have eaten at least 500 kilograms. It was frightening to see them. How could these beautiful girls eat so much? And they were all as slim as willows. How could those who didn't eat and would get fat if they didn't eat? When Zian and Yi Shi were declared dead, Yun Nuoshing, Feng and Little Bing Er were still eating. The latter two were mythological beasts and could eat a lot. However, Yun Nuoshing was a human. Although she was slightly transformed by divinity and basically belonged to the category of non-human, she was at least a human. Zian didn't understand why she could eat so much. The food here contained a lot of energy. Gradually, her digestion speed couldn't keep up with her eating speed. She had to stop eating. Could it be that the divine body of a receptive spirit could eat a lot? Seeing Yun Nuoshing struggling with one hand, Zian tacitly agreed. In the end, they almost finished all the ingredients in the shop. Only then did the five of them walk out with satisfaction under the dull gazes of the boss and the staff. Those who were also eating in the shop were so dazed that they forgot to eat. The food on the table had turned cold. These girls must be monsters. They ate 10,000 gold coins in one meal. The boss smiled bitterly as he looked at the messy kitchen. He couldn't help but sigh bitterly. Children these days really had a big appetite. 10 gold coins was enough for an ordinary family of 4 to live a well-fed life for a year. The 5 of them ate the food of 4 people for 1,000 years. Are you full? Yun Nuoshing walked to the end of the food street and stopped halfway up a small mountain. Chapter 749. The 7th Stage. 5 seconds passed. The 8th stage. 1, 2, 8 seconds. Continue. Although I've lost everything, I still want to watch. At this moment there was an uproar on the lively street. Following a series of countdowns, there was a loud cheer, as if there was a lively event going on. 12 stages, 15 seconds passed. Too strong. I lost again. This little girl is actually a formation master. No. This is the standard of a master. Definitely at the standard of a master. A wall of people formed in the lively area, as if the people from the nearby streets had all come over. They abandoned their shops and ran over to watch. Through the crowd, one could see that in the center, there was an azure formation flickering. A girl with colorful hair stood in front of the huge formation, her eyes focused on the formation. After a while, she raised her hand and moved it a few times. The formation instantly disintegrated, shattering into azure particles and dissipating. Roar. The 15th stage. When the crowd saw the shattered formation, they roared again, as if they were happier to see the girl crack the formation than to see themselves crack it. This was a game that was related to magic arrays. Players only needed to continuously crack the magic arrays. Of course, the cracking here couldn't be done with brute force. One could only use the power of the soul or use magic arrays to crack the magic arrays. For magic array masters, this game was quite familiar. Many magic array masters would use this game to strengthen their own magic array attainment. This kind of game formation device was quite common. Even if there were many formations on it, they were common formations that ordinary formation masters could come into contact with. There was nothing taboo about it. Starting from the first stage, the immortal grade formation, the difficulty gradually increased. Later on, there would be compound formation formations. Some of them only existed in theory, and those had to be cracked with theory. The 20th stage. I've lost so much that I want to cry, but I'm still very excited. I've decided. I'll still bet that she can't crack it in the next round. Brother, I've already made a lot of money by betting that she can crack it. Why are you still betting that she can't crack it? Come, it's starting. The 21st stage is about to begin. This time, it's a third-grade divine rank array. At this moment, the merchant was also staring intently at the color-haired girl. Every time she solved a level, she would receive a reward. Moreover, the reward would be stacked from beginning to end. The reward for each level would be higher than the previous one. At the end of each level, she could choose not to continue. That way, she could leave with the reward. However, if she continued and couldn't solve the level, then the reward would be wiped out and she wouldn't get a single cent. This merchant was also using this game to make money. 10 gold coins per attempt, and the time limit was 1 hour. At the same time, people could also place bets on whether the person who broke the formation would be able to break the formation or not. No matter how many stages the person broke through, how much they collected in the end, or even if they didn't collect anything, the merchant would still make a profit. It was just a matter of how much he made. Yun Nuoxing didn't care about how much money he earned. He was just here to play. For example, the reward for the 25 stages was as much as 1 million gold coins. That small merchant could still hold on to this reward. There were also many people placing bets around him. In fact, he didn't lose anything. Instead, he made a lot of money. Perhaps it was the psychology of people hunting for novelty. Every time they expected Yun Nuoxing to lose, they would increase the amount of bet. In the end, he would smoothly pass every time. It might be a bit of a stretch to say that he was unrepentant, but that was what it meant. It was as if he had made up his mind to not leave until he saw Yun Nuoxing lose. And they were destined to be disappointed for a long time, because Yun Nuoxing's speed of breaking the formation was still as fast as ever. Yi Shi curled up in Feng Er's arms and said softly, just based on Big Brother Nua's attainments in formations, coupled with the evil spirit eye, he can even break a 7th grade divine rank formation. This is too easy. When Xian and the others heard this, they also smiled slightly. If that merchant knew about Little Star's strength, they wondered if he would be blacklisted and not be allowed to play. But even if they didn't know earlier, they knew now. They didn't see any regrets from that merchant. Instead, they looked at Yun Nuoxing with a smile and got people to collect the bets while they were at it. After a long time, when Yun Nuoxing had broken a full 40 stages, his speed suddenly slowed down. The formation also jumped from 4th grade divine rank to 5th grade divine rank. This was a rather big hurdle. It could be seen from the fact that he had broken the formation so easily just now, but now, he needed to ponder for a while to break it. Hua! However, a mere 5th grade divine rank formation couldn't stop him. In less than 5 minutes, the gorgeous 5th grade divine rank formation shattered again. What followed was a wild clamor. That noise almost caused the entire street to collapse. I'm done playing. When he passed the 40th stage, Yun Nuoxing let out a sigh of relief. Then, he shouted to the merchant, I'm tired. I'm done playing. Hearing this, the merchant chuckled and took out a purple gold card. He said, this is the reward for accumulating 40 stages. It's a total of 6 million. If you pass the next stage, this amount can be doubled. These words were very tempting, but if he didn't pass, the 6 million would be wasted. Yun Nuoxing also knew this, but he didn't care about the 6 million. He was just tired. Yun Nuoxing smiled and shook his head. He said, I'm done playing. I'm tired. Seeing him like this, the merchant was a little disappointed. He saw that Yun Nuoshing was a little tired and knew that he was having a hard time. If Yun Nuoshing couldn't pass the 41st stage, the 6 million would go directly into his pocket. Unfortunately, he met a player who knew how to stop. However, just the bets alone made me a net profit of 10 million. After deducting the 6 million, there's still 4 million. After a while, the Shang family member comforted himself in his heart for a while. Then, he chuckled and placed the purple gold card in Yun Nuoshing's hand. He made a gesture of farewell, and the latter slowly left with Ziyin and the others. It's finally over. 40th stage. I lost so much tonight. I wonder where this little girl came from. She's such a young array master. TSK, TSK, TSK. Seeing Yun Nuoshing and the others leave, the street was once again in an uproar. At the same time, many people sighed. Tonight was an eye-opener for them. They saw someone pass the 40th stage with their own eyes. They can boast about it for a while when they go back. They squeezed through the crowd and left the crowded street. They turned a corner and walked to another street that was equally lively. However, at this time, the people on this street seemed to have been attracted to the place where they came from. There were fewer people. Phew, the after-dinner activity is over. Do you still want to play? Yun Nuoshing turned back with a smile, looked at Ziyin and the others, and said embarrassedly. He originally brought them out to have some fun, but he ended up playing alone. Well, Ziyin raised her head. Her jade-like finger touched her smooth chin. She pondered for a while. However, before she could say anything, a voice suddenly sounded from behind her. Moreover, the voice wasn't soft. Judging from the direction of the voice, it seemed to be directed at them. In front of me, beautiful little sisters like me, wait a minute. When he heard these somewhat panicked words, Yun Nuoshing paused for a moment. When he paused, the few girls also paused. They uniformly turned their heads around and saw a figure suddenly rushing out from the alley. When the slender figure rushed out, she bent her waist and held onto her knees as she panted. Due to the lighting, only half of her face could be vaguely seen. However, that half of her face caused Yun Nuoshing, who was used to seeing beauties, to feel a sense of amazement that he had not felt for a long time. Yes, it has been a long time since he was stunned by other girls. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains, and under her slender eyelashes, her big eyes were clear and shining like obsidian. Her small nose was pointed, and her rosy little mouth was opening and closing as she gasped for breath. Her mouth was moist like jelly, and it made people want to take a bite. Her beautiful face was full of pink, and it seemed to ripple with a layer of faint fluorescence. Her voice was exceptionally clear and pleasant, and it even had a hint of playfulness. At first, Yun Nuoshing thought that it was Yuer's tone. However, when he looked down, he saw a man's black clothes that wrapped around the girl's figure perfectly. Nothing could be seen, but just from her face, he could see that she was as beautiful as a fairy. When she smiled sweetly, it was hard for people to look away. Every frown and smile was filled with unconcealable temptation. To put it bluntly, she was so beautiful that she could bewitch all living things, or rather, bring disaster to the world. Yes, she was just like the people around him. She's probably in the top 10, right? Yun Nuoshing couldn't help but mutter. Ziyin and the others turned their heads and whispered, "What's in the top 10?" Yun Nuoshing was stunned. Only then did he realize that he had accidentally said it. Then, he whispered, "I said, based on appearance, she's in the top 10. Which 10? Ziyin suddenly asked curiously. Isn't it a little rude to say this? Yun Nuoshing scratched his head embarrassedly. It was one thing to make it up, yes, but it was another thing to say it out loud. Just say it. It won't affect anything anyway, Ziyin whispered in his ear. Her breath was like orchids and it made him shiver. Feng and Little Bing also looked at him curiously. It was as if they would not forgive him if he didn't give them an accurate answer today. Seeing that the girls were so curious, Yun Nuoshing's face turned bitter. He secretly scolded himself for talking nonsense. Then, he coughed dryly and said, "The rankings below are purely set by me. Yes, yes. As for the first place, it's hard to say. I don't know if I should put your two girls, Xianyin or her." He said something unpredictable as soon as he opened his mouth. As for the her, he was referring to the woman who looked like a saint and a demon. However, Xian and the others didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So he didn't even rank her. No wonder he only said that she was probably in the top 10. Seeing the strange expressions on the girls' faces, Yun Nuoxing also coughed dryly and said, "It's not my fault. It's a sin to be beautiful. Yes, it's your sin. I won't take the blame for this. Forgive me for not being able to rank her specifically. Ahem, I can only say, sorry for bothering you. Goodbye." After saying that, he turned around and wanted to leave. However, before he could leave, Xian reached out and grabbed him. Then, she asked, "What about the others?" "There's her, who just came out. Then, there's Bing Er, Qin Yen, Sister Yuyin, Sister Jean, Sister Liuli, Chanqian, Yuxiao. Well, I think you guys should just die together." At the end of his sentence, Yun Nuoxing's brain was about to explode. He felt that his brain wasn't enough. The faces of the girls kept spinning around in his mind, making him a little dizzy. Tisk. Xian and Feng Er both rolled their eyes. Yun Nuoxing suddenly put his hands on his waist and said domineeringly, "Ahem, I've decided. I'll put myself first. World peace. That's right. Narcissistic little star. But this is a good choice." Xian covered her mouth and laughed. "Well, but I still like this one now." Very suddenly, Yun Nuoxing changed the topic, startling the girls. Then, they saw that Yi Shi, who was hiding behind Yun Nuoxing and looking at the scenery, was inexplicably picked up by him. After Yi Shi was picked up, she also heard what Yun Nuoxing said. Her little face instantly became incomparably red, and her wine-red eyes shyly glared at him. She lowered her head and clutched her sleeves, not saying a word. "In the end, you still can't get rid of the Lulakan title. Feng Er, we've lost." Seeing this scene, Xian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She put her hand on Feng Er's shoulder, not knowing whether to laugh or not. Feng Er also nodded, a little speechless. "So what if I'm a Lulakan? Do you hate Lulakans? I'll go all out and say that I'm a Lulakan." Yun Nuoxing rolled his eyes, then reached out and pinched Yi Shi's little nose. He smiled and said, "Xiao Shi is so cute. She's so small and easy to raise." Yi Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her wine-red eyes glanced at Xian and the others, faintly showing a hint of pride, as if declaring her victory. Seeing this, Xian also pouted. But she also knew that although Yun Nuoxing liked Lulakans, it wasn't love between a man and a woman. It was probably just that he saw cute ones and liked them like a crazy person. Although, if things didn't go well, it might become true. While they were chatting idly, the girl had also finished catching her breath. She also heard what they said just now. She raised her head, and her clear obsidian eyes stared intently at Yun Nuoxing. She carefully said, "Hey, are you a man?" Hearing this, Yun Nuoxing and the others turned to look at him. He shrugged helplessly and nodded. When the girl saw him nod, she also looked at him in shock. Mei Mao's eyes flashed with amazement. She couldn't help but say, "She's actually as pretty as me." Ahem, that. After saying this, the girl regretted it and hurriedly tried to cover it up. But when she saw that Yun Nuoxing didn't react, she calmed down and then asked softly, "What's your name?" Yun Nuoxing hesitated for a moment, not really wanting to say his name. But when he saw the girl's serious gaze, he still said, For now, you just need to know that my surname is Yun." "Stingy, you don't even want to sign up." Hearing this, the girl raised her eyebrows, then put her hands on her hips and said very calmly, "Listen carefully, my name is Chu Yingzhan. I specially allow you to call me Fairy Chu." Chapter 750. Yun Nuoxing didn't know what to feel when he looked at this girl who was pretending to be arrogant but didn't even know how to act. He could more or less see the uneasiness in her eyes, as if she wasn't used to being like this. Xian and the other girls also looked at each other, but they had never heard of this name before, so they could only blink their big eyes and look strangely at this girl who called herself Chu Yingzhan. "Why are you all looking at me like that?" Chu Yingzhan couldn't help but swallow her saliva when she was stared at by them. She took a small step back and looked at them pitifully. I have a background, yes. I have a very powerful background, so don't mess around. Tell me, which emperor's daughter are you? Or which god's child? Or which god's disciple? Yun Nuoxing couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. This girl pretended to be very confident, but she was already somewhat hypocritical before she even spoke. He didn't know if it was just her nature or something else. Chu Yingzhan almost blurted out, but at the last moment, she suddenly closed her little mouth and accidentally bit her tongue. She immediately cried out in pain and jumped up and down while covering her mouth with her jade-like hand. Yun Nuoxing and the others. How could this girl be so rash? How did she live to this age? After crying for a long time, it was fortunate that there wasn't anyone around at this time. Otherwise, people would think that these girls were arguing and were about to cry. Chu Yingzhan wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and then muttered, "Father told me that I can't always talk about my background when I'm outside. It won't be good if I meet an enemy." Yun Nuoxing rolled his eyes and sighed helplessly. He waved his hand and said, "All right, let's not talk about that anymore. My name is Yun Nuoxing, and I've already told you my name. Why are you looking for us?" Yes. Chu Yingzhan nodded her little head and thought for a moment, then grinned and said, "I want you." Xian and the others spat out a mouthful of water. Yun Nuoxing also widened her eyes. Her mouth was agape for a long time, but she couldn't utter a word. Her dumbfounded look was very comical. What kind of announcement was this? "You want me?" I'm afraid I've misunderstood. Seeing that Yun Nuoxing and Ziyan were shocked beyond words, Chu Yingzhan was also stunned. Then, as if she had thought of something, her pretty face turned red with a bang. She quickly waved her jade-like hands and said shyly, "No, that's not what I meant. That is, I want you to do that, I was just watching from the side. You're a magic array master, right?" Yun Nuoxing and the others looked at her in shock. They only heaved a sigh of relief when they heard her last sentence. They nodded and said, "I guess so. Why? I want you to do me a favor." Chu Yingzhan wasn't too surprised by Yun Nuoxing's admission. She had been watching Yun Nuoxing break through the arrays and pass level 40. It was normal for him to have such ability. Although she didn't understand why Yun Nuoxing, who looked like he was only 16 years old, was at the level of a magic array Grand Master, it was fine as long as she knew that he had it. "Why?" Yun Nuoxing looked at her in amusement and asked. Why? I don't know why either. Anyway, I just want you to do me a favor. There will be a reward. How about it?" Chu Yingzhan grinned, revealing a row of pearly white teeth. Her smile was extremely bright, like a fairy, and the street suddenly lost its color. "Tell me what you need help with first. I don't want to attract trouble for no reason," Yun Nuoxing said. "Yes, it's like this. Tomorrow, there will be a small gathering in the south of Burning Flame City. Someone will bring an extremely complicated array tool. It's said that even some of the magic array grandmasters in Burning Flame City can't decipher the arrays on it. However, this matter seems to involve something else. At that gathering, someone will take out the array tool and invite everyone to decipher it," Chu Yingzhan said. "It doesn't sound like anything good, nor is it a good job," Yun Nuoxing said nonchalantly with his hands in his pockets. But I'm very curious. I've been cooped up here for 2 months. Every small gathering, that array tool will be taken out. I really want to know what that array tool is used for." Chu Yingzhan pouted, then stretched out a jade-white palm and smiled. If Star Lord Nuashing can help me decipher it, I'll give you a divine grade 5 array. How about it? Yun Nuashing was slightly shocked. He looked at Chu Yingzhan with his colorful eyes and could not help but have a different feeling. She could even use a divine grade 5 array as a bargaining chip. It seemed that this girl was not simple. Demigod rank 8. She looks to be around 18. On the surface, she's about the same age as this girl, but in reality, she's not much older. She's at most 100 years old. To be able to achieve this at this age, she must have a perfect inheritance and guidance. Her background is probably not simple, Yun Nuashing thought to himself. After a while, Yun Nuashing sighed and shook his head. A divine grade 5 array tool was quite tempting, but he did not lack it. Unless it was a divine grade 7 or 8 array tool, he might be able to move his body. Why? Is divine grade 5 not enough? Seeing him shake his head, the girl was a little anxious. She jumped on the spot for a while, then gritted her teeth and said, "Then divine grade 6. Yun Nuashing looked at her speechlessly. He sighed and shook his head. He did not really want to move, so forget it. Despicable fellow, then divine grade 7. Divine grade 7 array tool. I think that as long as you're a formation master, you won't be able to reject it, right?" Chu Yingzhan was so anxious that she was about to cry. "I beg you, just do me a small favor. If you think it's not enough, there will be other compensations after this. Even if you mention the ceiling array, I don't want to go. Listen carefully, it's a matter of whether I want to or not a matter of compensation." Yun Nuashing shrugged helplessly. He looked at the night sky and sighed. "Let's go back. It's late. Fairy Chu, rest early. We'll be leaving first." With that, he waved his hand and led Xian and the others back to their shop, leaving Chu Yingzhan alone in a daze. After a while, seeing that Yun Nuashing and the others had disappeared from her sight, Chu Yingzhan rubbed her black hair, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. She could not help but mutter, "What a strange fellow. He's not even tempted by a divine grade 7 array tool. Stingy, stingy. I curse you to lose sleep tonight." After muttering to herself for a while, she seemed to know that there was nothing she could do no matter how much she complained. She could only grimace and walk towards the end of the street. She kept muttering, "How can I open that thing?" In the mansion, Yun Nuashing sat on the sofa in the hall and stretched. Xian had brewed a pot of tea and was resting when he suddenly asked, "Why did Little Star refuse?" "Why? I just don't want to go. There's no other reason, I just don't want to go. If I want to go, don't talk about rank 7 or rank 6, just take me there. If I don't want to go, throw me a godly restriction formation." Yun Nuashing paused, then smiled and said, "Then I might really go." "I thought you would say that you won't go?" Xian looked at him with a smile. As for the value of a divine restriction array, even if I don't want to, I still have to give it a try. Yeah. Yun Nuashing shrugged with a smile. "To put it bluntly, I didn't throw you enough chips to overcome your laziness." She took a sip of tea, then moved her little butt and sat between Yun Nuashing's legs. She looked up at him and said with a smile, "Brother Nua, you really don't have any principles." What are you talking about?" Yun Nuashing blushed and rubbed her little head. The next morning, Yun Nuashing and the others sat in the shop and flipped through the books in their hands in boredom. The interspatial ring was placed on the table, waiting for the young man to come and take it. Although they didn't know when the young man would come, they still had to wake up early as they were doing business. They knew that no one would come to the shop. However, what surprised him was that although no one entered the shop, he could clearly see that many people were looking at the empty shop. He didn't know if they were looking at the people or the shop sign. After the incident with the young man, many people knew that there were several beautiful women in the shop, which made them even more curious. Although they didn't enter the shop to do business, it was good to sneak a few peeks through the door. Looking at the few women in the shop, they were all quietly reading book. The atmosphere was harmonious and tranquil. Such a scene could only be found in heaven. However, very quickly this peaceful atmosphere was broken. A young man hurriedly rushed into the shop, causing Yun Nuoshing and the rest to turn their gazes. When he saw the person who had arrived, Yun Nuoshing nodded his head. He pushed the ring forward and said, "All 8 of your array tools have been repaired. The cost of the materials is a total of 500,000. Do you need change?" The person who came was the young man. Looking at his hurried expression, no one knew why he was in such a hurry. After hearing Yun Nuoshing's words, the young man was stunned for a while. After a while, he widened his eyes and asked, "They're all repaired?" After saying that, he reached out and took the interspatial ring. When he looked at the items inside, the shock on his face became even more exaggerated. After a long time, he came back to his senses and laughed dryly. "No need, no need. Take the extra as an extra fee for young lady. I have a big business here. I wonder if young lady is interested in it?" The young man smiled at the door. This time, he didn't dare to look around casually like last time. After knowing Yun Nuoshing's ability, he also knew the power that she had. Not to mention that he couldn't afford to offend a grandmaster blacksmith. Even the people behind him didn't want to provoke her. It was better to be careful. "Speak," Yun Nuoshing said concisely. "There's no harm in telling you that we bought these things from the black market. Due to the fact that they're tattered, they're not worth much. However, the small bell that you repaired last time is a key, and we guess that it might be related to the Sky Illusion mountain range. There are a total of 2 keys, and the other key is sealed by a powerful magic formation." The young man paused for a moment before he continued, "Young lady, since you can repair the magic formations so easily, your attainments in magic formations must be very high, so, of course, we won't let you suffer a loss in this business. If the Sky Illusion mountain range is successfully opened, the Dragon Shadow Chamber of Commerce will enter to explore. The heaven and earth treasures and some other items that we find will total 10%. No, 20%. We'll give them to you, young lady. If they're not valuable enough, we'll find other items as compensation. What do you think?" The young man suggested with a smile. "The Dragon Shadow Chamber of Commerce? Can you make a decision on behalf of your Chamber of Commerce?" Yun Nuoshing looked up at him with her colorful eyes and asked. "I can. I'm the person in charge of the Burning Flame City branch of the Dragon Shadow Chamber of Commerce. Burning Flame City is the closest to the Sky Illusion mountain range, so I'm basically in charge of this matter." The young man clasped his hands together and said, "Let me introduce myself. I'm Yang Qian. My father is the president of the Dragon Shadow Chamber of Commerce. Even in Heavenly Fate City, which is the center of the Ganyuan region, I have a certain amount of influence." The Sky Illusion mountain range? Yun Nuoshing pondered for a moment. She wasn't too sure about the names of these places, nor did she know what was inside the Sky Illusion mountain range. However, since 2 keys were used to seal it, there should be something inside. She didn't completely believe Yang Qian's words, so she decided to trust him a little first. "Alright, let's go take a look." Yun Nuoshing casually closed the book with both hands and raised her head in response. She then said to Xian and the others, "Let's go. There's work to be done." Xian and the others smiled faintly when they heard this. They stood up with him and walked outside. Seeing this, Yang Qian hurriedly followed behind and led the way. After flying for half a day in the Burning Flame City, Yang Qian brought Yun Nuoshing and the others to a 2-story loft. This loft even had a rather large manor attached to it. The size of this manor could probably be ranked among the top in the Burning Flame City. The status of the owner was probably as extraordinary as this place. At this moment, there were many people walking in and out of this manor. They were dressed luxuriously and were all people of prominent status in the Burning Flame City. Furthermore, they seemed to be very familiar with this place and seemed to have been here many times. "This loft, is this a formation artifact?" Yun Nuoshing's gaze suddenly flashed as she stared at the loft. The astonishment in her eyes became slightly more intense. She felt a trace of familiar energy from the two-story loft. This loft was not a building but was formed by a formation artifact. This is a formation artifact of the Dragon Shadow Chamber of Commerce. Compared to a mobile palace, it is more convenient to carry around. Furthermore, there is a space array inside that can change the size of the space. Therefore, this loft is not as small as it looks on the surface. Seeing the astonishment in Yun Nuoxing's eyes, Yang Qian was a little proud. Then, he said, "This is the main venue for today. We have arrived at just the right time. Please." Yang Qian waved his hand and gestured towards the door of the loft. He smiled at Yun Nuoxing and led the way into the loft. The latter and the others followed closely behind. Just as they stepped into the loft, Yun Nuoxing and the others could clearly feel a faint spatial fluctuation around them. Their vision blurred for a moment before it became clear again. Only then did they see the interior of the loft clearly. The loft was filled with crystals, and the light that shone from them made the place extremely bright. Even the ground was covered with a layer of dazzling crystals. Although there were many people standing in the huge hall, it did not seem crowded at all. Instead, it seemed a little spacious. Yun Nuoxing walked into the hall and subconsciously looked around. She exclaimed softly. Such an exquisite building was rare. Even those high-class palaces could not be compared to it. Seeing them pause, Yang Qian also paused slightly. However, he did not stay for long. He walked to the side and softly said a few words to the attendant standing at the side. It seemed like he was arranging something. At first glance, it looked like a banquet. In fact, it was more or less the same. If Yang Qian had not explained his purpose earlier, Yun Nuoxing would have thought that he had simply dragged them over to attend the banquet. Looking up, the people in the hall were gathered in twos and threes. Other than some gods, Yun Nuoxing also discovered many young experts. Most of them were at the peak of the demon level or the demigod level. Most of the people who came are forces from the Burning Flame City. Brother Nuo, you don't have to worry. Even if you cause a ruckus here, I reckon that no one will be able to recognize you. Yi Shi smiled and tugged at Yun Nuoxing's hand. Yun Nuoxing did not care much about these things. Hence, she had to pay more attention to them. In just 2 days, she had figured out all the major forces in the Burning Flame City. Yun Nuoxing lowered her head and smiled as she rubbed Yi Shi's head. She did not have any other intentions. Seeing that Yang Qian was still talking about something, she was about to find a secluded place to stand. However, she heard a familiar surprised voice from not far away. "Ah, you despicable fellow, didn't you say that you weren't coming?" Yun Nuoxing turned her head in shock. She saw a young lady dressed in men's clothes standing at the entrance looking at her in shock. She was even running towards them with her slender legs. The young lady's surprised voice attracted the attention of some people. However, when they saw the source of the voice, they smiled and looked away. It turned out that it was this reckless girl. She had been here a few times. It was not strange that she would appear this time. When Yun Nuoxing saw that she was here, she did not react in time. Could it be that the place that Yang Qian brought them to was the gathering that the young lady mentioned? At this moment, Chu Yingzhan rushed to Yun Nuoxing's side with a head full of confusion and surprise. She suddenly stretched out her hand and grabbed his shoulder. He was shocked. Before he could struggle, the young lady suddenly pressed down on his shoulder and swung him. "Do you know how disappointed I was when you said that you weren't coming yesterday? I stood alone in the cold wind for a few minutes. I couldn't sleep last night and was almost hit by a carriage when I went out. Why are you here? I didn't tell you the location." Chu Yingzhan shook him vigorously. Her cherry lips opened and closed as she spat out a series of crisp sounds. Yun Nuoxing, who was being shaken until he was half dead, was completely confused. "Could it be that you deliberately rejected me and found your way here to give me a surprise? Despicable fellow." After shaking for a long time, Chu Yingzhan finally stopped her movements and abruptly let go of her hand. Yun Nuoshing was also thrown straight into Ziyan's embrace. Looking at Ziyan's dazzling appearance, Chu Yingzhan couldn't help but pout her little mouth and lightly snorted. Seeing that he was still dizzy after being tormented with great difficulty, Ziyan laughed in schadenfreude. She rubbed his temples with her jade-like hands and slowly calmed his dizziness. "What are you talking about, narcissistic girl? I was asked to come here today. I didn't know that this was the gathering you were talking about." Yun Nuoshing smiled bitterly and shook his head. This girl shook him so much that he almost vomited bile. "That's all?" Chu Yingzhan blinked her large eyes and looked at him pitifully. "That's all." Yun Nuoshing nodded in annoyance. Tch. Hearing this, Chu Yingzhan could not help but pout. A hint of disappointment flashed across her eyes. Yun Nuoshing smiled bitterly. "What are you looking forward to? But that's fine too. Since you're here, do something for this fairy. The reward still counts." "Yes, yes." A moment later, Chu Yingzhan reached out and grabbed Yun Nuoshing's wrist without saying anything and pulled him forward. Yun Nuoshing had a strange expression on his face. Ziyan and the others also helplessly followed closely behind. Chapter 751. Hey Yang Qian. Chu Yingzhan dragged Yun Nuoshing over to Yang Qian, who was talking to someone else, and called out briskly. Yang Qian seemed to be in the middle of discussing matters regarding the gathering when he was interrupted by a shout. This familiar voice caused his heart to thump loudly as he hurriedly raised his head. As expected, he saw Chu Yingzhan swiftly walking over with her long legs, causing him to involuntarily let out a dry laugh. Chu Yingzhan was also a beautiful woman, comparable to Ziyan and the others. Furthermore, she had her own unique charm. To Yang Qian, who liked to admire beauties, this was definitely an opportunity to feast his eyes. However, when Yang Qian saw this young lady who couldn't pretend to have the aura of a rich young lady, his expression became a little dazed. He seemed a little helpless and a little fearful. "That, Fairy Chu, why are you here again?" Yang Qian rubbed his hands and looked at Chu Yingzhan with uncertain eyes. Hearing Yang Qian's extremely reluctant words, Yun Nuoshing also looked at Chu Yingzhan strangely. What did this fellow do to make others so unnatural? Hearing this somewhat reluctant voice, Chu Yingzhan pursed her lips and snorted softly. "Why, am I not welcome? Welcome, of course I welcome you. Everyone who comes is a guest. There are no restrictions on the gathering. Anyone who is interested can come." Yang Qian rubbed his hands and hurriedly said. In the end, he added a sentence in his heart. "The prerequisite is that you don't make a fuss every time you come and cause a ruckus at the gathering. If it were anyone else who caused such trouble at his gathering, he would have chased them away." However, although this mysterious young lady was a little too noisy and lively, she didn't seem to bring any special trouble to others. Instead, she livened up the atmosphere of the gathering. Moreover, many people liked this overly lively young lady. Only then did he resist the urge to chase her away. Moreover, he couldn't figure out this young lady's background. He only felt that she had great power. I'm not going to talk about this with you. Take out that whatever, that lousy box of yours." Chu Yingzhan waved her hand and said. "Young lady, that's an 8 trigrams box. At least it looks like an 8 trigrams box on the outside. It's not a lousy box. I've already said it 3 times." Yang Qian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Although he was muttering, he still walked into the room obediently. If he didn't agree, who knew what kind of trouble this little ancestor would cause? However, many people liked this beautiful young lady. And even if Yang Qian was from the Dragon Shadow Merchant Guild, many people would probably speak up for her. In short, he would be at a disadvantage if he didn't agree. Not long after, Yang Qian returned with a palm-sized 8 trigrams box in his hand. The box was brownish-black in color and was only an inch thin. There was nothing special about it, and it seemed to be a small wooden box. Other than the 8 trigrams carved on the surface of the box, there was nothing special about it. Before he could hand it over, Chu Yingzhan extended her hand and grabbed it. Without saying anything, she stuffed it into Yun Nuoxing's hand and said, "Here, it's this. Open it." At this moment, Yang Qian finally noticed Yun Nuoxing behind Chu Yingzhan. He couldn't help but be stunned. He didn't express anything about the latter receiving the box. She had invited him over to study this thing. However, he was curious. When did Yun Nuoxing get to know this crazy girl? Do you think this is like picking a lock that can be unlocked just like that? Yun Nuoxing glared at Chu Yingzhan in annoyance and muttered. Then, he slowly opened his evil spirit eye and looked at the palm-sized box in his hand. He looked into the 8 trigrams box. Then, an extremely large and complicated array diagram rushed into his eyes. With just a glance, it caused his mind to ripple for an instant. In the wide array of azure arrays, hundreds and thousands of arrays seemed to be connected together through some kind of power. The power of the arrays resonated and spread out a terrifying power that shocked him. In front of that power, his spiritual strength was as insignificant as a speck of dust. With just a glance, his spiritual strength retreated. Yun Nuoxing hurriedly closed his evil spirit eye. He could feel that his eyes were a little hot. This was a warning from overloading. At the same time, it also reminded him that this wasn't something he could look at right now. "I can't undo it." Yun Nuoxing sighed helplessly. Seeing that he had come to such an answer with just a glance, Yang Qian and Chu Yingzhan were both stunned. The latter frowned and was about to speak, thinking that he was just being perfunctory. However, after thinking about it, perhaps because they weren't too familiar with each other and there was no need to hide it, she closed her mouth again. At first, Yang Qian also thought that Yun Nuoxing had just casually glanced at it. However, he clearly caught a trace of surprise from Yun Nuoxing's face. It was the same surprise as those array masters who had seen it before, except that Yun Nuoxing wasn't as surprised. "Although I'm not too sure about the grade of the arrays in this 8 trigrams box, I can guarantee that they are definitely above the 8th grade of the divine rank," Yun Nuoxing said helplessly. Hearing that, Yang Qian also smiled bitterly. The 8th grade of the divine rank was at the level of a great grandmaster. Even if he used all the wealth of the Dragon Shadow Chamber of Commerce branch that he managed, he probably wouldn't be able to invite them. That was already a legendary figure. Tisk, if Uncle Long was here, there should be a way. I'm so annoyed. Chu Yingzhan tugged at her hair in vexation as she stared at the 8 trigrams box, unwilling to give up. Chu Yingzhan nonchalantly snatched the small hammer from Yang Qian's hands. After looking at it, Mei Mao's eyes were filled with disappointment. She then casually tossed it to Yang Qian. She glanced at Yang Qian, who caught it in a fluster. With a wave of her hand, she took out a scroll. Chu Yingzhan gently caressed the scroll, and a trace of heartache flashed across her eyes. She gritted her teeth and stuffed the scroll into Yun Nuoxing's arms. She said unwillingly, "I'll give it to you, I'll give it to you. It's an 8th grade divine level array. Seriously, what a loss. After all this time, it's just this lousy thing. I'm going to die of a loss." Hearing this, Yun Nuoxing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Didn't you call out the price yourself? You'll feel heartache when it's time to pay." However, Yun Nuoxing was also a little surprised when he saw her give it away so readily. He thought that she would ask the faction behind her to send it over after some time. He didn't expect her to have it with her. He thought that she might be an array master herself. "Well, since you're the one who said it, it would be impolite of me to refuse." Yun Nuoxing tossed the scroll up and down with a smile before putting it away in her pendant. Chu Yingzhan pursed her lips. Yang Qian also felt a little apologetic when he saw her dejected appearance. After some thought, he said, "Our Dragon Shadow Merchant Guild will be heading to the Sky Illusion Mountain Range tomorrow. Would you like to come along?" "Can I come along?" Chu Yingzhan raised her head. Although she responded, she didn't seem to be too interested. She didn't seem to be very interested. This small hammer should be the last key. You've done us a small favor, so it's no big deal to bring one more person. Of course, it won't be a problem if you ladies want to come along, Yang Qian said with a smile. His last sentence was naturally directed at Yun Nuoxing and the others. What kind of place is that? Yun Nuoxing asked curiously. Yang Qian pondered for a moment before saying, yes. If you insist, it should be a large secret realm or a small world. Should be. Yang Qian nodded. It should be a sealed region. I don't know what it's like inside, but we've read about the Sky Illusion mountain range in a document. It's 100,000 kilometers wide and is sealed off by a barrier. However, it's a little too big to call it a secret realm, so we believe it should be a sealed small world. However, we don't know what happened, but it's connected to the God realm and just happened to fill in the Sky Illusion mountain range. A small world can cover a place in the God realm? Yun Nuoxing was a little surprised when she heard this. Could it be that the so-called cover was directly replacing a region? It should be directly overlapping the land of the small world with the earth of the God realm, she said slowly. Yun Nuoxing turned around and saw she stretch out two small white hands from her wide sleeves, one above the other, palms facing each other. Then, she slowly put her hands together. Just like this, the sky of the small world will merge with the God realm, and the land of the small world will be replaced by the God realm. But we'll only know the details after we go there. We haven't been there before, so we don't know what's going on, she said softly. Go. Bring me along. I want to see what's going on too. At this moment, Chu Yingzhan seemed to come back to her senses. She quickly raised her hand and shouted excitedly, When? Now? Let's go now. Yang Qian was a little speechless. He sighed and smiled bitterly. We'll leave tomorrow. Fairy Chu, don't be in a hurry. Go back and make some preparations. We'll leave early tomorrow morning. Let's meet at the east gate of Burning Flame City. Chapter 752. The next morning, Yun Nuoxing woke up from his sleep. He stopped circulating the Thousand Dream Heart Sutra, but the other Xian techniques and Xian techniques continued to circulate at a constant speed. The cultivation speed of several Xian techniques was very fast. There was even a vacuum around him. The energy there had been completely absorbed, leaving not a single bit behind. Seeing that the sky had suddenly appeared, he planned to get up and spend a few minutes waking up the girls. He then washed up and casually ate breakfast before heading out. Yang Qian didn't say what time he would arrive in the morning. In short, it wasn't a problem to go early. Yun Nuoxing let out a long breath for a while, stretched, and lazily sat up from the bed. When he saw that Xian and the others weren't around and seemed to have woken up early, he was stunned for a moment. However, he didn't stay in a daze for too long. He turned over and got off the bed. Suddenly, he was stunned. A tight feeling came from his body. If he had to describe it, it was the tight feeling on his palms, forearms, and legs. This made him curiously lower his head, and then his pretty face instantly turned a little dark. At this moment, he had unknowingly changed into a new set of clothes. He was wearing a light purple dress and white jade-like gloves that wrapped around his forearms. There was even a beautiful flower beside the glove. Furthermore, he was wearing long knee-length socks. Even his charming face was adorned with light makeup. His sparkling and translucent jade-like face and colorful hair were curled into the shape of a lotus flower. If he were to strike a pose at this moment, he would probably be mesmerizing to death. A few black lines drooped down Yun Nuoxing's forehead. After a moment, he bitterly sighed and reached out to take off the glove. However, to his astonishment, no matter how hard he tried, the gloves seemed to be stuck to his forearms. Even if he could pull at the end, he couldn't take them off. What the hell? Yun Nuoxing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If he couldn't take off the gloves, then he took off the socks. However, not only the knee-length socks, even the dress on his body couldn't be taken off. It felt as if it was sewn to his body. The black windbreaker that was casually thrown at the head of the bed was also kept by someone. "Little star, you're awake?" A stifled laughter came from the door. The owner of the voice seemed to have just laughed out loud. At this moment, he was forcefully holding back his laughter as he pushed the door open and entered. Yun Nuoshing looked speechlessly at Xian, who had just walked in, and said angrily, "Girl, I have something to say." "Okay, go ahead." Xian smiled and sat down next to him. She even rubbed his pretty face with her jade-like hand. "Forget about the cross-dressing thing. You won't be able to take it off in half a month. The four of us are all criminals." Yun Nuoshing opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, he heard Xian turn himself in and confess his accomplices. He was speechless instantly. So it was not only him and Feng Er, but even Xiaoxi and Bing Er were involved. What could he say? Curse? It seemed like he couldn't bear to. But if he didn't say anything, what would happen in the future? The problem was, how should he say it? "Forget it, I can't be bothered to argue with you. Don't mess around in the future. You're always fiddling with these things while I'm sleeping. Do you really think I'm a doll?" Yun Nuoshing sighed in distress, not knowing what to say. "Yeah, I think you're a doll. I couldn't help myself when I saw little star sleeping." Xian smiled and stuck out her tongue. Then, she said, "Don't worry, I've seen what I shouldn't see. Don't mind these little details." Yun Nuoshing was shocked by her words. He subconsciously clamped his legs together. When did this girl become a female gangster? Let's go, let's go. Xiaoxi and Feng Er are waiting outside." Xian smiled mischievously. Her pretty face blushed imperceptibly. Then, she dragged Yun Nuoshing, who had turned into Fairy Yun, or rather Yusin, and jogged outside. However, the latter's eyes were dull, as if she had been played with. In the courtyard, Feng Er and the other two girls were sitting on the stone bench in the courtyard. When they saw Yun Nuoshing being pulled out, they couldn't help but laugh. This laughter immediately made Yun Nuoshing, who was absent-minded, come back to his senses. Seeing the smiling faces of the three girls, he fiercely gritted his teeth and said fiercely, "Just you wait." Then, they left the courtyard with their tails between their legs. Yun Nuoshing sighed bitterly. "To be honest, the sins I've committed in my life are starting to bite me. What can I do? I'm also in despair. What a sin." As soon as Yun Nuoshing came out of the courtyard, he saw a somewhat unexpected person. When the person saw him, she looked at Xian and the other girls behind him, then fixed her eyes on him. Suddenly, she laughed loudly. Her laughter was like the sound of silver bells, crisp and pleasant, but it made Yun Nuoshing's face even darker. "Ha ha ha ha, young Master Yun. Oh no, Fairy Yun, ha ha. This time, it's the real Fairy Yun. You're as beautiful as me." The person who came was naturally Chu Yingzhan. Yun Nuoshing didn't know why she appeared at the door, but at this moment, he was too lazy to pay attention to it. Just her laughter alone was enough to throw all other thoughts out of his mind. Then, he glared at her fiercely. Unexpectedly, Chu Yingzhan laughed even more happily when she saw his expression. Her pretty face was so delicate that it didn't look angry at all. Instead, it looked like she was acting coquettishly, which made him want to play with her. She raised her jade-like hand and hooked Yun Nuoshing's chin. She said with a smile, "Fairy Yun, would you do me the honor of drinking with this young master?" Yun Nuoshing was angry, but he couldn't vent it. He didn't have a place to vent it. After a long while, Chu Yingzhan set off with Yun Nuoshing and the others. She had already found out where Yun Nuoshing and the others were staying yesterday, so she ran over here early in the morning to wait for them. After hearing Xian explain the whole situation, her laughter became even more unrestrained. "Remember to call me next time. I'll come too, I'll come too." She even excitedly said that if they were going to put on makeup for Yun Nuoshing, count her in too. "Haha, okay." Then, Xian also agreed readily. Yun Nuoshing sadly felt that sooner or later, He would be ruined by these girls. By the time they reached the east of the city, half an hour had already passed. It was mainly because Chu Yingzhan was beside him. Yun Nuoxing couldn't use the light element, but the speed of the group wasn't slow either. Although he was only the second seal of the demon rank, the girls beside him were 3 gods. One was at the peak of the demon rank, and the other was at the demigod rank. All of them looked stronger than him, so naturally, their speed wouldn't be slow either. In the suburbs of the east of the city, Yang Qian and the others were already there. There were also a few youths that they had seen that day. Moreover, from the looks of it, they seemed to have just come out of the city gate. There were also some people wearing the robes of the dragon Shadow Shang clan following them from the city gate. They seemed to have just arrived too. The few of them descended from the sky. Yang Qian's gaze immediately turned and landed on Yun Nuoxing and the others. After a glance, he hurriedly looked away and smiled faintly. Fairy Chu, Fairy Yun is also here. Since everyone is here, it's about time to set off. This time, there were a total of 30 people on Yang Qian's side, including the youths, and 5 people on Yun Nuoxing's side. In addition, there were also Chu Yingzhan, who had already started chatting with Xian and the other girls. There were a total of 36 people. As for the things that they had prepared, such as dry rations and tents, they had all been prepared. Whether they would be used or not was another matter. The Sky Fantasy Mountains were 10,000 miles away from the Burning Flames city. Furthermore, within 10,000 miles of the Sky Fantasy Mountains, there was only one Burning Flames city. The others either happened to avoid this region or disappeared in history. Oh, this time, we will announce to the public that we are going to the Lingyu Canyon to train. Let's keep a low profile. It's always better if fewer people know about this for the time being. Yang Qian looked around the group and then said. Hearing this, everyone roared in response. The roar caused Yang Qian to stagger and almost fall. He hurriedly roared, "Hey! Didn't you say to keep a low profile?" A series of loud laughter came from the crowd, causing Yang Qian to feel a little helpless. He tidied his robes, then waved his hand and took the lead to soar into the sky. The others behind him followed closely behind. The distance of 10,000 miles was not considered very long for Yang Qian and Yun Nuoxing's group. They did not need to use a few magical beasts as transportation. However, just getting there alone would take 1 or 2 days, even if there was a large group involved. If something happened along the way, it would not take more than 2 days, unless they were fooling around on the way. A demon rank expert could travel 10,000 miles in a day. The strength of these 36 people was also quite good. Other than Yun Nuoxing, Yang Qian and the 6 youths were demigod rank 3 or 4. Chu Yingzhan was demigod rank 8, and most of the others were above demon rank 6 seals. Moreover, the strongest was a god sun expert, who seemed to be here to protect Yang Qian. Of course, this was under the circumstance that Yun Nuoxing's group was not included. Otherwise, there would be an emperor god expert leading the group. After walking for 12 to 14 hours, the sky unknowingly darkened. Yang Qian took out a map and glanced at it. He secretly calculated the distance in his heart. After flying for another hour, he took the lead and landed on a flat, open ground. He glanced at the surroundings. This place was surrounded by vigorous green trees, and could be considered a relatively hidden place. He looked around for a long time before saying, "Let's set up camp here today. It's less than 1,000 miles away from the Sky Illusion mountain range. We will enter early tomorrow morning." Everyone nodded and did not object. They each found a good spot to set up camp. Other than those who chose to set up camp, a portion of them simply sat cross-legged on the trees to cultivate while being vigilant of their surroundings. As for Yun Nuoxing and the others, they strolled in the forest. Chu Yingzhan could not help but follow them. When Yang Qian saw them, he did not say anything. Their group was each more mysterious than the other, especially that 10-year-old girl. She was an array grandmaster. Even her father would have to be polite to her when he saw her. He did not bring anyone else from the Dragon Shadow Chamber of Commerce for this exploration. It could be said that he acted on his own. This was not because he was eager for quick success. He was equivalent to an advance party. It was better to explore first. When the situation stabilized and he felt that there was a need to call for reinforcements, he would inform the other experts in the Dragon Shadow Chamber of Commerce. The time of a god expert was very precious. Before Yang Qian figured out the situation, he was unwilling to act casually. Yang Qian, in the blink of an eye, where did those fairies go? At this moment, those few youths walked out of the forest slowly. They had just gone to clean up the demonic beasts in the forest. In the end, they did not see anything after walking around. Furthermore, the atmosphere in the forest was a little dull, which made them feel uncomfortable. What's wrong? You're thinking of seducing those fairies? Don't blame me for not reminding you, but there's a formation grandmaster in their group. The other key to the Sky Illusion mountain range was unlocked by that grandmaster. Yang Qian looked up at the carefree young man with a grin on his face. Grandmaster? That has to be above the 8th stage of the divine level. Don't brag. They are only in their 20s. How could they? That carefree youth blinked, then laughed and shook his head. He stared at Yang Qian and said. However, when he saw Yang Qian's extremely serious gaze, he was stunned. Could it be that you are not joking? That carefree youth scratched his head awkwardly. The few youths beside him also looked at each other in disbelief. They really did not want to believe it, but they had known Yang Qian for so long and knew that he would not speak without thinking. Could it be that it was true? Now, if you feel that you are lucky, you can go and flirt with them. Yang Qian said with a smile that was not a smile. Didn't they see that he was self-aware and did not go and flirt with them? These guys were really thick-skinned. If one were to say who liked women the most in this group, it would be Yang Qian. At this moment, even a veteran in the field of love like him had silently stopped. It was obvious that there was a problem. Cough. If that's the case, won't it be very dangerous to bring them along? The carefree youth coughed dryly and muttered, We only have one god-level expert on this trip. If they have that kind of strength and want to do something, then we can only blame ourselves for being unlucky. Yang Qian was also a little helpless. He sighed and said, Well, they were the ones who unlocked the key. According to the agreement, I do have to bring them along if they want to come. However, even if we send reinforcements, we probably won't be able to deal with that grandmaster. We can only save it. It's good that you didn't become an unscrupulous merchant. Can't we really not call for reinforcements before we find out the situation clearly? Another youth who looked very indifferent said, Those who can enter the Chamber of Commerce, unless they are guards, are all unscrupulous merchants. For example, me cough. We won't act without seeing the hair. This time we came out to explore first. We can only be honest people and play some tricks. I haven't lived long enough. If that master moves his finger, we will all be wiped out. Yang Qian coughed dryly. The few youths also smiled bitterly. It seemed that this was right. At night, Yun Nuoxing brought the few of them to walk casually in the forest. Xian and the others did not care about anything. They chatted happily with Chu Yingzhan. It was peaceful along the way. The forest was unusually quiet. Even some magic beasts that were active at night did not seem to move. Gradually, Chu Yingzhan felt that something was wrong. Yun Nuoxing seemed to be walking casually, but he seemed to be looking for something. This made her feel uneasy. She said weakly, Hey, where are you going? Don't tell me you want to find a remote place to kidnap me and sell me? Yun Nuoxing stopped walking and looked at Chu Yingzhan strangely. He said in surprise, Why are you so smart? Help. Murder. Kidnapping. Robbery. This fairy is about to be kidnapped. Chu Yingzhan looked at him pitifully. She opened her mouth wide and screamed at the top of her lungs. Her voice did not even travel 10 meters away. Scream all you want. No one will pay attention to you even if you scream until your throat breaks. Yun Nuoxing smiled evilly and rubbed his hands. He looked at Chu Yingzhan like a wolf that saw a fat sheep. Throat. Throat. Break your throat. Mwahahaha. Xian and the others were speechless when they saw the two of them showing off their acting skills. Can't they talk properly? These two drama queens. Cough, let's get down to business. After laughing for a while, Yun Nuoxing coughed dryly and pointed at the surrounding trees. He said, "Look, can you see anything wrong?" Chu Yingzhan looked at the trees suspiciously. She tilted her head and blinked her beautiful obsidian eyes. After looking for a long time, she shook her head. This array master can't see anything wrong. She thought that Yun Nuoxing was asking her to see if she could see any traces of an array. She rolled her eyes and said, "It's not an array. Look more carefully." Chu Yingzhan focused on a big tree for a long time. Then, she shook her head and looked at a tree beside her. After a long time, just when Yun Nuoxing thought that she had seen something, she suddenly shouted, "Very big!" Yun Nuoxing was speechless. The corners of his eyes twitched. He asked, "What else?" "Also very tall. Very green. The branches and leaves are lush. It's nice to enjoy the shade under the big tree." Chu Yingzhan giggled as she reached out her jade-like hands and counted the branches. Yun Nuoxing was speechless. He wanted to scold her for being an idiot. "What else?" Chu Yingzhan turned around and looked at him innocently. Her little face was full of anticipation. 0 points. Go and see for yourself. Yun Nuoxing turned his back to her and walked elegantly into the depths of the forest. You miser. You can't be like this. Hurry up and tell me. I was wrong, okay? This fairy will apologize to you." Chu Yingzhan saw that he was keeping her in suspense and immediately became anxious. She jumped up on the spot and chased after Yun Nuoxing. She grabbed his hand and said pitifully. Yun Nuoxing didn't even look at her. Chapter 753. A strange feeling? It seems a little strange, but I can't tell what's wrong with it. Chu Yingzhan tugged at her hair in distress. She looked at Yun Nuoxing in confusion, hoping that he could explain it to her. "Yes, it's fine as long as you can sense it here." Yun Nuoxing nodded. Then, he waved his hand gently, and a wisp of wood element condensed in his palm. He said, "You don't have the wood element, so you can't sense it as clearly as I can. From what I can sense, this forest is dead." "Dead?" Chu Yingzhan cried out in surprise. Mei Mao looked at the trees beside her, but she couldn't tell what was wrong. "You'll know once you take a look." Yun Nuoxing nodded. He walked in front of a tree and slapped it hard with his palm. Bang! With a dull sound, the brown bark was smashed to pieces by the palm, revealing a silver-blue color. It was as if the tree had turned silver in an instant. Even the leaves were silver-blue in color. "This is?" Chu Yingzhan looked at the silver-blue tree curiously. Then, she turned to look at Yun Nuoxing. "This is a kind of sculpture that has been eroded by the power of the void and contaminated by the power of space." Yun Nuoxing rubbed his palm gently on the silver-blue tree. He said, "The overly dense power of space destroyed its shape in an instant. The remaining power preserved its shape, and it became like this. This tree has been frozen forever at the moment when the power of space swept over. It has been preserved as a crystal." "I'm afraid the surroundings are like this, right?" Yun Nuoxing sighed softly. He raised his head, and a light purple flame condensed. Then, a shock wave suddenly exploded. It automatically ignored Xian, Chu Yingzhan, and the others and bombarded the surrounding trees. Ka. The flame shock wave shattered the brown bark of the trees, turning it into powder that drifted in the air. What appeared in front of everyone was a silver-blue forest. The color made Chu Yingzhan's hair stand on end. Now we can basically confirm that the Sky Illusion mountain range has undergone a large-scale spatial transfer or spatial overlap. Yi Shi also looked at the silver-blue forest and said, when a large-scale spatial transfer or spatial overlap is carried out, it will condense an excessive amount of spatial power. When the spatial power condensed is too large, it will automatically compress into extremely condensed energy. Furthermore, when the transfer or spatial overlap occurs, the compressed energy will return to its original form. The compressed energy is enough to create a huge shockwave. Depending on the size of the object, this shockwave, it can even sweep over hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Of course, this method is very ancient. Now there are safer space warp and space shift, so the above situation will not happen. Yi Shi played with a strand of hair, then looked around and sighed. The situation here is a trace left behind by the first situation, and according to Yang Qian, it should be a trace left behind by the overlapping of space. The range of the impact is really not small. This entire forest has been turned into a fossil. If we dig it out, can we sell it as a piece of art? Yun Nuoxing also sighed. No wonder there were no magical beasts here. They were probably all dead. The earth here had also died along with the trees, and it probably wouldn't recover. Spatial transfer and spatial overlap were already common 2 or 3 eras ago. There shouldn't be any spatial overlap. Furthermore, looking at the traces here, it shouldn't have been 10 million years ago. Oh, how strange! Yi Shi muttered. She said the last sentence very softly. Even Yun Nuoxing didn't hear her, nor did she pay attention to it. It seems that even if we don't want to pay attention to the Sky Illusion mountain range, we have to take a look. Yun Nuoxing said casually. She then looked at Yi Shi and suddenly thought of something. She said, Little Shi, when you raised the price with Yang Qian, did you know about this Sky Fantasy mountain range? Yi Shi nodded and said, I know, but I don't know much about it. I only know that it's a place similar to a secret realm. As for what's inside, I don't know. However, there's nothing wrong with asking for a higher price. If it weren't for the fact that he still has a key, I would have snatched it and gone in to take a look myself. Everyone smiled bitterly. Is it really okay for you to be so straightforward? After wandering around the forest for a while, they didn't find any more meaningful clues. Yun Nuoxing and the others returned to the camp. When they returned, they saw Yang Qian and the others looking at them curiously. They looked like they wanted to talk to them, but didn't dare to. Yun Nuoxing couldn't be bothered with their strange looks. She casually set up a tent, set up a spatial formation, and went in. Xian and the others also went into the tent. Chu Yingzhan hesitated for a while, then muttered, I'm just too lazy to set up a tent. She also went in after them. The space inside was much bigger than it looked. It was at least the size of a small attic. Let alone 6 people, even 10 people wouldn't find it cramped. They casually rested for a night. Early in the morning, when the sun had just risen, Yang Qian woke up everyone who was sleeping. He also very carefully woke up Yun Nuoxing and the others. Facing the light of dawn, the group tidied up and set off again. After a day of hurrying, the distance of 10,000 kilometers was now less than 500 kilometers. Most of them were powerhouses of the demon rank and above. They slightly increased their speed and arrived in front of a mountain range in less than an hour. At this time, the sun had just risen. Oh, we've arrived. The Sky Illusion mountain range. Yang Qian reminded them from the front. Everyone hurriedly raised their spirits and looked ahead. Before them was a stretch of mountain range that was like a tall wall. The height of the mountain range was more than 1,000 meters. The side of the mountain that faced them was as smooth as a mirror. Before the sunlight shone on it, they could see the glossy luster, as if a part of it had been perfectly cut off by a sword. Those 10,000-meter tall peaks were like blades that were slanted towards the sky. The brownish-yellow luster flickered with a frightening radiance. On those densely packed blades, There were even corpses of demonic beasts, as if they were trying to intimidate them. There's a very large barrier outside the mountain range. Ordinary methods can't break it. Young Master Yang, it's your turn. Yun Nuoshing's evil spirit eye tightly stared at the mountain peak filled with corpses. His eyes flickered with a substantial radiance. In his eyes there was a huge array that couldn't be seen through. After a brief moment, he looked at Yang Qian and smiled. Hearing that, Yang Qian also smiled and nodded. With a wave of his hand, the small bell and a small hammer appeared before him. He lightly held them and used the small hammer to lightly strike the small bell. Dong, the sound of the bell wasn't clear. Instead, it was somewhat muffled. Circles of ripples appeared in the air, causing the brownish-yellow mountain range to ripple like water. Following that, a colorful barrier slowly appeared before everyone. That barrier seemed to encompass the entire Sky Illusion mountain range. It was difficult to see its entire appearance with a single glance. That barrier was like a soap bubble, wavering in the air, giving people the feeling that it would shatter in the next second. As the bell rang, the barrier that was like an inverted bowl gently swayed. Following that, a crack slowly appeared in front of everyone, before slowly expanding. As the barrier opened up, thunderous vibrations resounded between the heavens and earth. The mountain range also started to violently shake. The crack also started to shake even more violently under the shaking. In just a short while, it expanded from the width of a person to 100 meters wide. When everyone saw the situation inside, they all sucked in a breath of cold air. That's... Yun Nuoshing also widened her eyes in astonishment. What appeared inside the crack was a silver-blue world. Or rather, it could be said that the Sky Illusion mountain range was encompassed by a silver-blue world. That was a crack in space, not the void. There was only deathly darkness in the void, and this silver-blue world was just a crack between space and the void. It was filled with the power of space. Space and even time had become extremely chaotic there. If one wasn't careful, one would be teleported away. As for where one would be sent to, that would be up to fate. A crack in space. A place like that actually exists. Yi Shi was also a little surprised. As everyone knew, when one shattered space, one would see a pitch-black void. The void wasn't incomparably sturdy, and it could also be disturbed by stronger forces. If the void was shattered, one would be able to see the hidden barrier that belonged to the domain of time. That was the natural barrier that guarded the intersection of space and time. The space crack didn't belong to space, it didn't belong to the time barrier, and it also didn't belong to the void space. It was a thin layer of separation between space and the void space. Because it was so thin, even a mortal-level warrior could casually tear it apart. However, to open it, one had to have a great amount of power. Maybe a great God Realm warrior could do it, or maybe someone who was proficient in the power of space could do it. However, this was the first time that everyone had seen such a theoretical situation. Moreover, there were people who had set up a barrier to isolate it. After everyone entered, the crack slowly closed. At this moment, the space around them was filled with a silver-blue river. The space in the crack in space was constantly flowing, like a fine art painting. It looked mysterious and fascinating. Yun Nuoshing reached out to touch behind him, but he didn't touch the edge of the barrier as he expected. This made him realize that the moment he entered the crack in space, the boundary of space became blurred. This was in the crack, not the barrier. The barrier was just an entrance. This is the aura of the primordial era. Ziyi suddenly cried out in Yun Nuoshing's soul, startling him. Then, he heard her continue, the aura of the primordial era, but there's no aura of the great samsara in it. This place was exiled into the void and only returned to this place in recent years. Only by staying in the void can one not be contaminated by the aura of the great samsara. Returned? You're saying that this place was once separated from the realm of the gods? Drifting in the starry sky? Yun Nuoshing asked, puzzled. I don't know. This place does have the aura of the primordial era of the realm of the god. Go and look around. See if there's anything that can be used as a clue. Ziyi shook her head. With the help of Yun Nuoxing's eyes, she looked at the silver-blue world. Her slender eyebrows slightly furrowed. It seemed that many thoughts were surging in her mind, but she couldn't find a concrete answer. The Yin spirit flame is moving slightly. Something might have attracted its attention. Don't worry, it's not a divine flame. It might be something else, Ziyi said again. Yun Nuoxing was so excited that he almost jumped up. However, the latter half of her sentence was like a bucket of cold water poured over him. He could only smile bitterly. However, it also made him curious. If it wasn't a divine flame, what else could have attracted the Yin spirit flame's attention? The mountain spirit flame and purple night flame didn't react. Be careful. Don't spread out too far. We still don't know what's inside, Yang Qian said softly. Everyone nodded. Yang Qian. At this moment, Yun Nuoxing's sudden call made him turn his head. He smiled at her and said, "What's the matter?" Ignoring the smile that he thought was very charming, Yun Nuoxing rolled her eyes. She looked behind her and said, "Try and see if you can open the barrier." Hearing this, Yang Qian was also stunned. After a moment, he nodded. He picked up the small bell and hammer that he hadn't put in yet and gently knocked. Ding! The different sound of the bell caused Yun Nuoxing and the others to tremble slightly. This bell was like the crisp ringing of a bell. It didn't have the grand and heavy sound from before. Yun Nuoxing and the others looked around vigilantly. They wanted to see what was going on. However, the sound of the bell rippled slightly in the air and quietly disappeared. It didn't even cause the space to ripple in the slightest. "I think we're trapped here." Yun Nuoxing couldn't help but laugh softly when she saw this. That seems to be the case. Ha ha ha. Yang Qian was also stunned for a moment. Then, he laughed dryly, causing everyone to be speechless. "Did you understand or were you scared silly?" After laughing dryly for a while, the expression on Yang Qian's face eased slightly. He mumbled for a while, then helplessly turned his head and looked at Yun Nuoxing. Then we can only find another exit. I can't open it anyway. But it's no big deal. The worst-case scenario is that we'll be trapped here forever. Yes, that's all. Yun Nuoxing replied with a sigh when he said the first word. Her words made everyone's hearts turn cold. However, they looked at Yi Shi with hope. She was a great array master. She should have a way. Don't look at me. The space in the crevice is already chaotic to a certain extent. Let alone a teleportation formation, we might not even be able to find an exit. Yi Shi helplessly shrugged her small shoulders when she saw everyone's hopeful gazes. She spoke in a rather heartless manner. Don't. My two elder sisters must have a way, right? Little sister, this little fairy is in the prime of her life. I don't want to be buried here for no reason. No one will remember me even if I die like this. At most, the detestable father and mother who cheated their daughter will cry and say that I just ran away from home and haven't had enough fun. Isn't this dying before achieving victory? Before the others could react, Chu Yingzhan's little face suddenly collapsed. Her expression was as exaggerated as it could be. Her words also made Yun Nuoxing and the others a little speechless. Chapter 754. In the pitch-black tomb, there was a hole that was more than 100 feet high and more than 100 feet wide. Neat rectangular areas were dug out from the stone walls on both sides. Statues and murals were placed on top of them. The stone statues and murals gave people a very oppressive feeling. They were incomparably heavy, making the already dark tomb even more gloomy and terrifying. Half an hour ago, Yun Nuoxing, Yang Qian, and the others discussed for a while and left behind a jade slip. The two groups then split up to find a way out. The huge spatial crevice was much bigger than what they could see from the outside. This was originally the interior of the Sky Fantasy mountain range, but another piece of land was forcefully stuffed in. Perhaps because of poor technique, these two pieces of land did not merge together. Instead, they were stacked together, making this space appear extremely vast. The piece of land that was forcefully stuffed in divided the Sky Fantasy mountain range into 4 parts from the middle. The piece of land that was forcefully stuffed in occupied the most central position. This was discovered by Yun Nuoxing's group after they split up. It was not a shocking clue. It was better to say that they were mentally prepared for it. Yang Qian and the others also seemed to have discovered something, but they didn't find anything special. They saw a city. Perhaps because it was in the spatial crevice, the city was well preserved. It was just that there was nothing inside. There were many traces of battle, like traces of a great battle. On Yun Nuoxing's side, they were following a very irresponsible leader. This leader also very casually let a wisp of inexplicable consciousness in his body lead them forward. As a result, they were led into this extremely strange tomb. However, they didn't know at first. From the surface they saw a house. After pushing the door open and entering, it turned into a tomb. Even the door was gone. This also made them realize that this was caused by the chaotic space here. Trouble after trouble. Speaking of which, are you all afraid of ghosts? Why are you holding on so tightly? I'm afraid of ghosts too. At this moment, in the tomb, several bright crystals were floating. They were 10 meters away from each other, illuminating the space within 100 meters. Yun Nuoxing walked with difficulty because he was being pulled by several pairs of jade-like hands. His clothes were all messed up. However, looking at Ziyan and the others, they didn't seem to be afraid. At least, they weren't afraid of him. His heart was beating like a drum. Looking at the dark tomb, he felt his heart tighten. You're already an adult, yet you're still afraid of ghosts. I think ghosts will be more afraid of Brother Nuo. Yi Shi, who was walking in front, turned around and smiled mischievously. She made a face at Yun Nuoxing. If there really were ghosts, they would probably be scared out of their wits when they saw Yun Nuoxing's crazy appearance. However, Yun Nuoxing's elegant clothes and pitiful face didn't have any power at all. So you're afraid of ghosts? He, a dignified demonic realm cultivator, is actually afraid of ghosts. Don't worry, the space within 100 meters is illuminated. Even if there are ghosts, they won't scare you. Even if they suddenly appear, there's still this fairy. Chu Yingzhan smiled sweetly and waved her small fists, looking fearless. Yun Nuoxing looked at her strangely and sighed. Then don't pull on my sleeve. It's going to tear. I'm supporting you so that the space won't be chaotic, and everyone won't get lost. It's the most tiring thing to look for someone. Chu Yingzhan curled her lips, turned her head, and snorted softly. As she spoke, she gripped Yun Nuoxing's dress even harder, making the latter very nervous. She was afraid that she would tear her dress. You're the one who's afraid, aren't you? Yun Nuoxing glanced at her, then looked at Ziyan, who was almost half in his arms, and Feng who was walking in front of him and holding his hand. She couldn't help but sigh. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. They're just ghosts and otherworldly items. What's there to be afraid of? To tell you the truth, I've seen otherworldly soldiers. Chu Yingzhan blushed and rolled her eyes at Yun Nuoxing. Then, she waved her small fists and began to brag. Looking at her playful bragging, Yun Nuoxing, Ziyan, and Feng looked at each other. Then, Yun Nuoxing smirked and looked forward. Suddenly, he screamed, "Ghosts!" Chu Yingzhan was also startled by this scream. Her pretty face changed dramatically. She quickly grabbed Yun Nuoxing and threw half of her body into his arms. Then, she raised her head nervously. However, before she could raise it, she quickly lowered her head. She wanted to look but didn't dare to. Yun Nuoxing and the others didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I thought you weren't afraid of ghosts? Yun Nuoxing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chu Yingzhan was startled when she heard this. She hurriedly raised her head, only to see that the area in front of her was completely empty. There was nothing there, only a few tattered coffins and tombs standing below the stone statues to the side. It was quiet, as if it had been there since ancient times. After a while, Chu Yingzhan's pretty face suddenly turned red. She quickly struggled out of Yun Nuoxing's arms and glared at him angrily. "You tricked me. Look at how cute you are. It would be a waste if I didn't play with you," Yun Nuoxing said with a smile. "I'm going to kill you." Hearing him admit it, Chu Yingzhan immediately exploded. She was so angry that her beautiful hair fluttered even though there was no wind. She punched Yun Nuoxing's chest with one of her jade-like hands, and her other hand also punched down angrily. "Little fists are punching your chest. Are you acting coquettishly with me?" Yun Nuoxing couldn't help but chuckle. Her punches were small and delicate, so he didn't feel any pain. "Screw you!" Chu Yingzhan angrily slapped his chest and snorted. She turned her head and ignored him. However, her jade-like hands were still grabbing Yun Nuoxing's sleeves, as if she was worried that he would disappear. Xian and Feng'er smiled as they looked at each other. Since Little Star was teasing Yingzhan, it also proved that she was someone worth befriending. It seemed that they didn't have to be too wary of her. At this moment, Little Bing Er, who was walking behind them and pulling Yun Nuoxing's long hair, asked curiously, "So Daddy is afraid of ghosts?" Because this was the first time Bing Er called Yun Nuoxing in front of her, this form of address made Chu Yingzhan stare blankly for a long time. Mei Mao looked at Yun Nuoxing in astonishment, then turned her head to look at Bing Er and asked in astonishment, "She's your daughter?" Yun Nuoxing scratched his head in distress. He thought for a moment, then saw Bing Er's dependent gaze, and could only nod helplessly. "In name, you can just take it that way." In name? I understand, I know." Chu Yingzhan looked at him in astonishment, then sighed and nodded. She looked as if she already knew everything, which made Yun Nuoxing's expression become a little strange. Just as Yun Nuoxing felt that something was wrong, Chu Yingzhan sighed and looked at him meaningfully. Then, she looked at little Bing Er and whispered in his ear, "Did you get cuckolded?" Yun Nuoxing suddenly spat out a mouthful of water. Although this sound was very soft, Xian and the others still heard it, and their expressions became extremely strange. Yi Shi, who was in front, happened to kick a handful of soil. She didn't react in time and staggered and almost fell. Yun Nuoxing's face twitched for quite a while. His face was as black as charcoal. Just as he was about to open his mouth to say something, his footsteps suddenly paused. After which, he slowly raised his eyes and looked forward. He glanced at her and said, "I will teach you a lesson later. TSK, I'm a demigod. No matter what, I'm still stronger than a little demon like you. Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Hearing this, Chu Yingzhan pursed her lips but didn't say anything. When she saw that he had stopped, she also stopped and looked in the direction that Yun Nuoxing was staring. Then, Mei Mao also froze. Yi Shi took a few steps back and came to Yun Nuoxing's side. She looked ahead cautiously. In the middle of the road, a gray shadow was faintly discernible and seemed to be drifting erratically. Furthermore, this shadow appeared very suddenly, and there was no reaction. It only appeared when they were less than 10 meters away. It was the figure of a young man about 25 years old. His face was frighteningly pale, and his messy long hair made him look especially terrifying in this gloomy environment. His eyes were empty and lifeless, and contained a sense of loss and pain. His entire body floated half a foot on the ground like a ghost. "Finally, a guest has arrived." A hoarse voice slowly resounded in the tomb. Yun Nuoxing and the others were stunned, and they all stared at the young ghost. They knew that this was a remnant soul, and the voice just now was clearly his. There was no other male voice present. "Since you're here, stay with us." That cold and gloomy voice contained pain and ferocity. The young man lifted his head, and his confused eyes were bloodshot. He looked at Yun Nuoxing and the others with an evil smile. His messy long hair and beard were mixed together. His huge eyes were wide open, and there was a terrifying majesty in them. Yun Nuoshing looked at the pair of eyes and went into a trance for a moment. It was as if he saw a purgatory in the netherworld. Countless vengeful spirits floated between the heavens and earth, roaring at him. Rolling in energy condensed into a skeleton that was tens of thousands of feet tall before him. A giant palm suddenly came down from the sky. Yun Nuoshing's expression was absent-minded for an instant before he suddenly let out a loud shout. His shout was mixed with spiritual strength as it abruptly spread outwards. The frightening purgatory scene suddenly exploded and dissipated when it came into contact with this spiritual strength. At the same time he shouted, Feng Er and the others beside him also shouted in unison and broke free from the purgatory illusion. Then, they looked at each other, and their expressions became serious. What did he just say? Why did he suddenly attack us? Chu Yingzhan frowned, and her obsidian-like Mei Mao sparkled as she stared at the young man's remnant soul. That's the language of Kanzaki. It's normal that you don't understand it. Yun Nuoshing rolled his eyes at her and wanted to say something, but Yi Shi had already let out a coquettish grunt. Her petite body shot out, and hundreds of spell formations condensed around her in an instant. Like a blue spear, they shot towards the young man's soul fragment. Who cares what he said? Let's kill him first, Yi Shi shouted. She waved her small hand, and hundreds of arrays smashed down. The young man's remnant soul roared at the sky, and an incomparably violent aura swept out like a storm. A gray whirlwind rushed towards the arrays. Bang! 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 The gray gas seemed to be very powerful, but when it came into contact with the arrays, it suddenly exploded like fireworks. It didn't even have the time to spread out before it was annihilated in midair. The young man's remnant soul roared like a ghost. He waved his hands, and two hidden swords pierced out with a shocking cold light. Kacha! The two hidden swords of unknown grade directly hit the arrays. With just a light touch, the two hidden swords instantly shattered into a pile of fragments. The young man's remnant soul was completely exposed under the light of the arrays. Wisps of black gas evaporated from his body under the illumination of the arrays. When the array swept past the young man's remnant soul, his blank eyes regained their clarity. A ray of light flashed past, and the gray soul body also regained its clear appearance. The black gas that evaporated from his soul dissipated as soon as it left his body. When Yi Shi saw this, she waved her small hand, and the arrays returned to her. She looked at the young man's remnant soul and waved her hand at Yun Nuoshing and the others, who were jogging over. She still looked at the young man warily, and the arrays around her spun and spewed out terrifying energy. The nightmare is over. After dozens of epochs of wandering, I've finally returned to my homeland. Stranger, thank you for freeing me from the nightmare. The young man looked at Yun Nuoshing and the others, and smiled as he clasped his hands. The remnant soul was like a candle in the wind, and after the black gas dissipated, he completely lost his strength. At this moment, his body became slightly transparent. His eyes were as clear as a mirror, and he stared at Yun Nuoshing and the others with a smile. His transparent body quickly disappeared into the air, turning into specks of light that floated into the sky. Xian and the others looked at each other, and then they all looked at Yun Nuoshing. He spoke the language of Kanzaki, and only he could understand it. Chu Yingzhan was still a little confused, but when he saw Xian and the others staring at him, he also turned his obsidian-like Mei Mao to stare at him, although he didn't know what she was looking at. Being stared at by Chu Yingzhan was a little uncomfortable. Yun Nuoshing laughed dryly, waved his hand, and hurriedly ran to the place where the young man was just now. There was a lone grave there, and an ancient tablet that had fallen and shattered into pieces. How is it? What did you see? Chu Yingzhan curiously ran next to him and squatted down to look at the shattered ancient tablet. She looked up at him with her beautiful eyes and stared at him in a daze. She didn't even ask why he knew the language of Kanzaki or anything like that. It was as if it wasn't a big deal for him to know, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that she wasn't surprised. Yun Nuoshing rolled his eyes. He hadn't even read it yet. He squatted down and looked at the words that were blurred and fragmented by the erosion of time. After deciphering for a long time, he finally extracted a piece of information that he felt was useful. He read it softly. Azure Cloud Great Emperor. HM? Emperor Azure Cloud? Hearing this name, Yi Shi froze for a moment, then hurriedly ran to his side, squatted down and asked, "What's wrong with Emperor Azure Cloud? You know him?" Seeing how nervous she was, Yun Nuoshing blurted out in shock. But as soon as he said that, he bitterly smiled. How could little she know the language of Kanzaki that this young man spoke? She probably heard it before. Yi Shi rolled her eyes at him, then unhappily poked his head with her hand and said, "Emperor Azure Cloud, one of the strongest gods in the Dark Age, but he fell on the path to becoming a celestial. No, perhaps the word fell isn't quite right. Back then, he went missing, there was no news of him dying in battle. These things are still recorded in the Dark Age hero spirit record. Although not everyone knows about it, there are actually quite a few people who know about it. Emperor Azure Cloud was also very famous back then. In the chaotic era of the Dark Age, he stepped into the god realm together with a few other good friends, and they worked together for many years, climbing towards the celestial realm. But in the end, they disappeared without a trace. It was also a strange story back then, so when I heard this name, I felt a little incredulous," Yi Shi said. After hearing this, Yun Nuoshing fell into deep thought. He asked Zai in his mind, "Zai, didn't you say that this is the aura of the far ancient era?" "The aura of the far ancient era does indeed smell like this, there's no mistake about it. But why do you say it's the Dark Age? I really don't know." Zai also shook her head in confusion. She came from the far ancient era, so naturally, she wouldn't mistake this aura. Or rather, it was precisely because it was the aura of the far ancient era that she felt close to it. Yun Nuoshing was silent. He calmly stood up and looked in front of him. A Dark Age hero spirit. Was there any other existence in this tomb? Even if the gods of this generation had amazing cultivation, they couldn't escape the suppression of time in the end. In this dark place where there's no sun, they became ghosts and fell forever. Xian stared at the broken tombstone and sighed faintly. Chapter 755. Hey, how do you know that's the language of the gods? Do you speak the language of the mythological era? I can't tell you. Don't be so stingy, I won't tell anyone. There's only a few of us in this godforsaken place, there won't be a third, seventh person who knows. Just now, an ancient ghost appeared. Who knows if another one will appear? That's a ghost, just a dead thing. It's already dead, why would it care about your secret? Hurry up and tell me. Act cute and I'll tell you. Meow. Where's your moral integrity? In the dark tomb, they couldn't tell the direction. There was only one source of light that covered 200 meters. This narrow stone passageway seemed to have no end. The ground was filled with wooden crosses, and occasionally, one or two tattered ancient tablets would appear, telling the people in the light source of the desolation of this place. It wasn't that they didn't want to go out, but they had been wandering in this tomb for more than an hour and still couldn't find the exit. They could only continue walking along this endless passageway. Beside them, there were huge stone sculptures and murals that didn't change. The gloomy air spread out invisibly, making the group below feel very oppressed. They could only talk to relieve the gloominess in their hearts. Amidst the banter and banter, an unknown amount of time had passed. The great Emperor of Azure Cloud was not the only remnant soul they had seen. However, he was the only remnant soul that still had a little bit of consciousness. The others, after being shattered by Yi Shi, did not stay for long before disappearing. When they disappeared, they were all in a daze and did not remember who they were in the end. Great Emperor Ling Ying, Yin Yang Soul God, Emperor God Wu Yang Yun Nuoshing spat out the names of the powerful deities of the Dark Age. The more he said the names on the stone tablets, the more shocked Chu Yingzhan and Yi Shi were. Although they called themselves great emperors, they were all powerful deities. There was no one who wasn't a deity buried here. This place was like the graveyard of the gods. Groups of gods were buried here, and a few of them had remnant souls left. However, in the long river of time, all of them had been obliterated. The remaining remnant souls were also in imminent danger. Any god could easily deal with them. Yun Nuoshing and the others continued to walk forward, talking about irrelevant things. Suddenly, a lake appeared in front of them. On the calm surface of the water there was a woman. She was extremely beautiful, and her deep Mei Mao was like the calm sea. Her temperament was like that of an immortal, as if a real fairy had descended to the mortal world. However, her eyes were dim and lifeless. Her sea-blue eyes, which should have been moving, were now like stones. When Yun Nuoshing and the others stopped in shock, the woman in the lake glanced at them indifferently. Her steps did not stop. Every step she took on the surface of the lake caused slight ripples. However, her figure remained in the same spot and did not close the distance between them. Splash! The lake water suddenly roared, creating a wave that was tens of thousands of feet tall. It swept towards the 6 people from Yun Nuo planet. The monstrous wave contained a bone-chilling aura that froze the crosses and stone tablets on the ground. Yun Nuoshing's mind focused. Just as he was about to make a move, Yi Shi shouted softly. Her petite body rose into the air, and she struck out with her palm. It was as if her palm had pierced through the void and directly hit the waves. Bang! The sweeping waves were smashed into splashes by the petite palm. The bone-chilling cold disappeared in an instant. Yi Shi's figure also swooped down in an instant. In less than a breath's time, she was in front of the woman. From her wide sleeves, a strong power of death gushed out and enveloped the woman. The fairy was stunned. There was no light in her ocean-blue eyes. She watched indifferently as the power of death eroded her. Wisps of black gas were also peeled off from her body and finally disappeared into nothingness. After a moment, Yi Shi quietly retreated. The fairy's eyes regained their clarity. A wisp of helplessness and unwillingness flashed across Mei Mao's eyes. However, it was only for an instant. This expression completely disappeared and was replaced by an expression of relief. Mei Mao stared at Yi Shi and smiled slightly. She nodded at her. Her figure also gradually disappeared like the previous remnant souls. This is the 5th one, right? How many more heroic souls are buried in this pitch-black place? But what I am more concerned about is, where is the exit? Yun Nuoshing and the others walked to Yi Shi's side. Yun Nuoshing let out a long sigh and muttered somewhat helplessly. Heroic souls? Yi Shi raised her head and glanced at him. Then, she looked forward and softly said, There is a resentment in these remnant souls. It is this power that prevents them from transcending and entering reincarnation. They are imprisoned in this place where there is no light. Imprisoned? These are all deities. Who can imprison them? Yun Nuoshing could not help but exclaim in shock. Even deities could be imprisoned? The high and mighty deities are just weak children in front of even more powerful deities. Yi Shi kicked away the cross erected in front of her. Then, she smiled and said, After dozens of eras, even if they are the remnant souls of deities, they do not have much power left. Any deity can easily deal with them. They are not as terrifying as they look on the surface. Don't worry. Yun Nuoshing shook her head and said helplessly, I am very confident in Little Shi's combat power. I am just very worried about whether we can get out of here. As soon as this was brought up, everyone fell silent and looked sullen. They had been walking in this godforsaken place for 6 hours. Little Bing Air only realized that 6 hours had passed when she was counting the time out of boredom. In the space crevice, there was no clear space. Space turned from an illusory entity into an illusion within an illusion. It was an existence that could not be touched but could be known. At this moment, it became even more unclear. If it were not for this reason, with Yun Nuoshing and Yi Shi's attainments in magic formations, they could easily pass through it. It was a pity that their teleportation formation did not work here at all. After sighing for a while, Yun Nuoshing habitually lowered her head. At this time, the lake had disappeared. The ability to change the world with a single thought was indeed possessed by deities. It was just that they were only in appearance. It was difficult for them to release monstrous power. On the ground, there was a severely shattered stone tablet. The fragments were spread over 3 meters. It took a long time to put them together into a stone tablet. Yun Nuoshing looked inside and was stunned. She said in astonishment, Shuei-Wu, the self-proclaimed water deity from the Dark Age? That fairy just now was her? Chu Yingzhan cried out in surprise. She grabbed Yun Nuoshing's clothes and could not help but use a bit more strength. Why are these deities gathered here? Why are they all dead? Yun Nuoshing frowned. Compared to the titles and names of those deities, she felt that it was a very terrifying thing for them to die here. I don't know about that. Brother Nuo is the deity. You can see the characters on the tombstones. Did you not see any information? Yi Shi shook her head and said softly. No, many of the broken tablets are blurry. Only the names are clear. Some of the words can be recognized. I know every word, but they can't form a sentence. Yun Nuoshing squatted down and looked at the tombstones of Shuei-Wu and water deity. Other than the names, there was one word at the bottom that she could barely recognize. Chaos. Yun Nuoshing murmured. Previously, on the Azure Cloud Emperor's tombstone, there was a word drifting. On the second tombstone, there was a word foreign. After that, there was a word shatter, destroy, and fall. This one has a word chaos. Can you guys think of anything? Raising his head, Yun Nuoshing looked at Xian and Chu Yingzhan for help. Anyway, at this time, his brain was about to shut down. He knew every word, but it was a pity that the words were not connected together. Who knows if they were talking about the same thing? Even if they were talking about the same thing, it would be difficult to recognize them with just a few words. I'm not too sure. Although I am curious about history, it's only curiosity. I didn't study it too deeply. I do know some things about the Dark Age, but I don't know about this. If I know the time, maybe I can know what happened. Chu Yingzhan murmured. When was the Azure Cloud Emperor? Yun Nuoshing looked at Yi Shi and asked. I only know that he was a god of the Dark Age. More than that, I have no way to investigate. Even the Dark Age hero record did not record the year of his birth. In fact, the people recorded in the hero record do not have the year of their birth. It only records what the person did. Yi Shi said. Then isn't there no other way? Yun Nuoshing stared. The girls nodded helplessly. They really didn't know. Xian's experience was similar to Yun Nuoshing's. Although Feng was one of the 4 mythological beasts passed down from the mythological era, she didn't have any specific memories. As for little Bing she was just a month old. She was like a blank piece of paper. Gulyalu, while Yun Nuoshing and the others were troubled, a strange sound came from the tomb. It sounded like something was rolling. The echo was very loud. It came from the front and made them shudder. Chu Yingzhan was so frightened by this sound that she shrank behind Yun Nuoshing. Her obsidian eyes stared mischievously at the darkness in the distance, and Yi Shi was already prepared for battle. When Yun Nuoshing and the others reacted like birds, startled by the twang of a bow, the sound went silent again. The tomb was quiet. Only the sound of their rapid breathing could be heard. Pairs of bright eyes looked around vigilantly. After a while, nothing special happened. Only then did they relax a little. Let's go. Maybe the answer we want is in front. Yun Nuoshing waved her hand and looked at the hole in the front. She slowly walked forward. Xian and the others followed closely behind. After an unknown period of time, perhaps 4 or 5 hours. Little Bing Er was too lazy to count. She held Yun Nuoshing's long hair and followed closely behind. During this period, there were occasionally heroic souls who came back to life. However, Yi Shi slapped away the black matter inside them, freeing the heroic souls from the Dark Age. However, as they walked forward, the number of heroic souls decreased. At first, they would see one every once in a while. Now, they couldn't see any at all. At first, the few of them would chat. However, later on, for some reason, they all shut up. The atmosphere became oppressive. It was as if a great demon was staring at them from the deep darkness. After passing through an abyss that suddenly appeared and walking for another hour, a magnificent hall appeared at the place where the crystal shone, underground palace. Yi Shi could not help but murmur softly when she saw the hall from afar. In the deep tomb, a hall was embedded in the rock wall. Countless thick stone pillars supported the stone walls from top to bottom. The hall was a mess. There were corpses everywhere. Many of them were broken. Arms, legs, and heads were densely piled together. These people seemed to have experienced a fight before they died. Even the hall looked tragic. The ancient Dark Age. What happened here at that time? After walking into the hall and seeing this tragic scene, Yun Nuoshing felt a little suffocated. Some of the corpses piled together were dark gold. Some were pure gold. She knew that these gold and dark gold corpses were the corpses of gods. Even though they were omnipotent when they were alive, now, after 70 or 80 eras, only the corpses of gods remained. These corpses of gods no longer have any power. All of them have been obliterated by time. Yi Shi looked at a golden thigh bone at her feet and let out a long sigh. There was a sense of disappointment in her voice. She could not help but bend down and use her divine essence to wrap her sleeve and pick it up. Not long after Yi Shi picked it up, the thigh bone trembled slightly and turned into a golden powder that drifted in the air. Seeing this scene, Yun Nuoshing and the others could not help but sigh. Gods, gods! The supreme power that so many people pursued was nothing but a speck of dust under the scouring of time. After dozens of eras, they turned into ashes in the end. Is this the end of the gods? But what's the difference between them and ordinary people? In exchange for a vigorous life, they were buried in this dark place and quietly turned into powder. Yun Nuoshing sighed sadly. He did not want to talk about the meaning of life here. He just could not help but sigh. He wanted to ask why they had worked so hard for so many years to become God. Great Emperor Qin Yun, Great Emperor Ling Ying, Emperor God Wu Yang, Water Spiritual God, Yin Yang Soul God, they were all gods. The corpses in the hall were also gods. However, before they died, no one thought or knew that their glorious lives would be buried in this unknown place. In the end, why did they spend their lives in poverty? Let's go back. Chu Yingzhan tugged on Yun Nuoshing's sleeve, her beautiful face a bit sad. She couldn't bear to see such a scene and seemed a bit sad. There's no way back. Now is not the time to be sad. If we can't find a way out, we will become the second batch of people buried here. Yun Nuoshing shook his head. The space in the space crevice is very chaotic. Formations and spatial power are not effective. We can only find a common passage. Since someone was buried here, there must be an exit. Even if it's buried, we can dig it out. Chu Yingzhan bit her red lips with her pearly white teeth. After a while, she nodded gently. Chapter 756. In the dusty hall, bones and bone dust were piled all over the floor. In the center of the hall, a giant sarcophagus floated quietly. This sarcophagus was about 3 meters long and 1 meter wide. It was placed on a 6-step staircase. The surface of the sarcophagus was covered in mysterious runes. The closer one was to the sarcophagus, the more bones there were. These god spirits seemed to have been fighting over this mysterious sarcophagus before they died. There were many god spirits in the Dark Age. Even in the Ancient Age, there were many god spirits. However, in the later stages of the Ancient Age, the god spirits went into hibernation. In the Ancient Age, the god spirits did not appear. The Emperor realm was first. At that time, the god Emperor was the strongest fighting force, Shi said quietly. The skeletons were piled up in a crooked manner. With the slightest breeze, they would turn into dust and scatter on the ground. Yun Nuoshing and the others approached the stone coffin. Just as they were 3 feet away, a sense of vigilance suddenly surfaced in their minds. They felt slightly dizzy. Be careful. The thing in this sarcophagus is not simple. Or rather, the runes on the sarcophagus are very mysterious, Shi reminded them. Dozens of eras have passed. The god spirits have been annihilated in the river of time. What is in this sarcophagus that can cross the boundary between life and death of the god spirits? Yun Nuoshing frowned. He also felt that strange feeling. It was as if he would be thrown away if he took another step forward. The aura on the sarcophagus seemed to be eternal. The god spirits had been annihilated in the river of time. Little star, we can't get close to this sarcophagus. As Yun Nuoshing took a few more steps forward, Xian and Chu Yingzhan felt a little dizzy. Their faces turned pale. It was as if there was an aura locked onto them. It made them shudder. They quickly took a few steps back. What's wrong? Yun Nuoshing turned his head. He saw that only Xian and Chu Yingzhan had retreated. Bing Er and Feng Er were right behind him. They did not seem to be affected. He did not feel anything strange either, although this sense of vigilance was very strange. Xian shook his head and said, "My soul trembles when I get closer. Even with my physique. I'm about the same. I don't know the specifics, but why were you able to go up? This fairy is very unhappy." Chu Yingzhan crossed her arms in front of her chest and watched Yun Nuoshing and the others climb up the stairs. She couldn't help but mutter. There was a hint of unwillingness in Mei Mao. Hearing their words, Yun Nuoshing raised her eyebrows. This situation was quite interesting. Even the 5 elements body couldn't get close, and even the demigod masters couldn't move an inch. It probably had nothing to do with the physique or divinity. Since they mentioned the soul, Bing Er and Feng Er were both divine beasts, but their souls shouldn't be strong. I guess it's because of the soul contract? Yun Nuoshing muttered to herself with uncertainty. After guessing for a long time, she still couldn't figure out the reason. She turned her head and said to the 2 girls, "You 2 go and look at other places. Bing Er, follow them." Hearing the last sentence, Bing Er nodded obediently. She walked lightly to Xian and Feng Er and quietly stared at them with her blue-gold eyes. Xian nodded and walked to other places in the empty hall. Chu Yingzhan was a little uncomfortable with Yun Nuoshing giving orders, but she didn't say anything at this time. She muttered and followed Xian to the side. Yun Nuoshing, Feng Er, and Shi carefully looked at the sarcophagus in front of them. As they walked closer, the throbbing in their souls calmed down a lot and became indifferent. This made them even more curious. The sarcophagus in front of them was completely sealed. There was no lid, and even with Shi's Grandmaster level, she couldn't recognize the mysterious runes on it. Yun Nuoshing gently stroked the sarcophagus and shook her head at Shi and the others. There were also people who spoke the language of gods in the Dark Age. I thought it was related to the language of gods, but now it seems that it should be the runes of gods or the Dark Age. I can't recognize it. Even Big Brother Nua can't recognize it. We can give up. There's no need to study it. Hearing this, Shi straightforwardly stepped down from the stairs. Even Yun Nuoshing, who had the most ancient knowledge and language, couldn't recognize it. It was basically futile for them to study it. There was no need to waste time. Moreover, there were so many gods. Although they didn't know what kind of earth-shattering battle happened, in the end, they couldn't open the sarcophagus. No matter how hard they tried, it would be useless. There were 4 skeletons closest to the sarcophagus. They probably couldn't do anything to the sarcophagus. Okay. Yun Nuoshing also nodded. She turned around and walked towards Xian and the others. Hearing the footsteps behind them, Xian and Chu Yingzhan looked at each other and slowly stood up from their squatting positions. Chu Yingzhan coughed softly and looked at Yun Nuoxing with a slightly red face. She said, "Little star, don't we look like we're robbing a tomb?" As she said that, she stretched out her hand. In the palm of her white jade-like hand, there was a pendant. There was a strange sky-blue gemstone hanging from the pendant. She had found it while wandering around. In fact, she had found more than one thing. However, when she touched the other things, they all turned into dust and disappeared like the skeletons. Only this piece was perfectly preserved. Although it was dim and lightless, since it could withstand the erosion of dozens of eras, it shouldn't be an ordinary object. Yun Nuoxing took the pendant and looked at it. She gently caressed the strange sky-blue gemstone and felt a slight touch. However, after a while, she sighed and put it back in Xian's hand. She said helplessly, "Keep it for now. I can't recognize it." Hearing this, Xian and the others looked at her in surprise. Shi couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh my God, the mobile encyclopedia is not working today." Two blue veins popped out on Yun Nuoxing's forehead, and his cheeks twitched. He retorted, "Everything that exists here is from the Dark Age and above. If placed in the present, they are all cultural relics among cultural relics. And those that can be left behind from that era are all divine objects. Although I have read a lot of books, I can't recognize everything." "That's true." Shi nodded in agreement. Then, she joked, "Why don't I go back and get some books from the Dark Age for Brother Noah so that you can study them?" "Forget it." Yun Nuoxing smiled bitterly and shook his head. Wandering aimlessly in the hall, looking at the corpses lying in the corners, Yun Nuoxing could not help but let out a long sigh. Then, he found that there seemed to be a line of words carved on the ground beside one of the corpses. This made him a little surprised. In this hall, almost everything had decayed. He did not expect that there would be words preserved. However, when he stopped and wiped away the dust and wanted to take a closer look, he was disappointed again. The words carved on the hard floor were indeed preserved. However, they were very blurry and couldn't be recognized. However, the blurry words here were different from the blurry words on the ancient tablet in front. The blurry words on the ancient tablet were affected by the erosion of time. The power contained in the words had also disappeared with the passing of the owner. The same was true for the words. However, the words on the ground were destroyed by someone. There were many scratches. It could be seen that it was done by a sharp weapon. Shi tried her best but couldn't leave a mark on the ground. It was obvious how strong the floor here was. Even after dozens of eras, it still didn't break. Yun Nuoxing still tried to decipher it. Even though it was scratched beyond recognition, there was still a little handwriting left. It was very shallow and difficult to recognize. He could feel a little when he pressed it with his hand. Fortunately, those scratches were a little shallow. If he used more force, he would not be able to recognize it at all. The extremity of heaven, the beginning of Tao. After a long time, Yun Nuoxing recognized 6 words with difficulty, and said them out loud. When Shi and the others heard him speak, they were all stunned. They quickly pricked up their ears, wanting to hear more. However, they saw Yun Nuoxing shrugging helplessly. "That's it. I can't recognize the rest. I can't recognize anything from those 6 words." Shi frowned slightly and scratched her hair. Then, she said in distress, "But I'll remember it first. I'll look for it when I have the chance in the future." After walking around again, they didn't find anything else. Yun Nuoxing and the others could only sigh and look at the deeper passage. It seemed that they could only continue walking forward. On the other team, Yang Qian was a little depressed. After stepping into this strange space crevice, 2 groups of people were teleported away. Their group arrived in front of a dilapidated ancient temple. They hadn't even taken 2 steps when another group was teleported away. A team of more than 30 people was completely scattered in about 10 minutes. Only a few youths and the son of God expert were left. There was no news of the others. What the hell is this place? Yang Qian was very depressed. They had come here as the vanguard to investigate, but they had been scattered into piles without seeing anything. Furthermore, 2 of the soul tablets in his hands had already shattered. This meant that those 2 fellows had been buried here forever. Perhaps even their bones could not be seen. Compared to this, he was more worried about the whereabouts of Yun Nuoxing and the others. Not to mention that they had an array grandmaster with them. He didn't know their background. If something happened to them in his hands, he wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. Young master. The son of God expert looked at Yang Qian and couldn't help but sigh when he saw the confusion on his face. It's okay. Let's walk around here first. It's not a good idea to stay here. Yang Qian waved his hand and said, from now on, don't go too far. Try to gather within a 3-meter radius. If another person is teleported away, we'll be in trouble. We still haven't figured out where this place is. Why don't we go there first? A youth pointed behind him. There was a vague shadow of a building there. Okay. Yang Qian nodded. He had been watching that place for a while. It was when they were heading towards that place that a group of people had been teleported away. At this moment, the number of people had been reduced to a dangerous level, which made him hesitate. However, there was no use in hesitating. He could only go there first and make the next decision. Waiting was not a good idea. As they flew through the mountains, the son of God expert took out a tough rope and tied it around their arms. This was to prevent the sudden spatial disorder from throwing them out again. After passing through a canyon, they rushed out of the mountain range and arrived at a plain. Yang Qian waved his hand and stopped. Looking at the place in front of him, there was some shock in his eyes. This was the ruins of an ancient city. It covered an area of hundreds of thousands of miles. Judging from its size, it must have been a glorious city in the past. However, under the erosion of time, it was now in ruins. The walls had collapsed, and the houses had collapsed. Dense forests had grown in many places. It looked like a city in a primitive forest. On the mottled walls, there were many vague marks carved. This city left behind from the Dark Age vaguely told Yang Qian and the others about its former glory. However, time had washed everything away. Desolation flashed across the hearts of Yang Qian and the rest when they saw the shattered walls and houses, as well as the skeletons that littered the ground. Although they did not know what the city had experienced, they could not help but sigh when they saw the once majestic city reduced to a dilapidated field, leaving behind only a desolate land. No one could completely investigate what had happened in the Dark Age. It was likely that no one knew what this city in the spatial crevice had experienced. So tragic. I heard that during the Dark Age, the entire divine world, no, the entire 8 elements realm, was shrouded in a haze. There was an invisible hand controlling everything in the 8 elements realm. At that time, this hand had also done something to the divine world. I don't know if this is the trace left behind by that hand. A weak-looking youth whispered. This was a secret of the Dark Age. Not many people knew about it. Even in ancient books there were only a few records. It was possible that some ancient books had this content. Invisible hand? The son of God expert asked with a puzzled look. It seemed that he knew something about it. Yes. The weak-looking youth nodded weakly. However, after a moment, he laughed dryly. But, during the Dark Age, there were a lot of demonic beasts and monsters in the divine world. Unlike these 2 eras, where they retreated to the extreme plain region, there were basically the same number of humans and demonic beasts in the divine world. In fact, there were even more demonic beasts. In the divine world ruled by demonic beasts, it wasn't rare for a beast tide to destroy a city. Well, I'm just guessing. It's not impossible. Yang Qian nodded. However, he couldn't see anything from the outside. He could only say, let's go in and explore first. There's no point in guessing now. We'll know when we see any clues. The Dark Age. The cities of the Dark Age would record some major events. Some major events that changed the city on the skyward monument in the center of the city. We can go take a look, if it hasn't been destroyed. The weak-looking youth said. I say, third brother, can you not be so nervous every time you speak? Can't a real man like you stick out your chest? A youth couldn't help but shout at him. So sorry. Everyone. Chapter 757. At this moment, in the dark underground palace, they had left the hall of the gods' graveyard, and left the tombs full of tombs. They were deep into the underground palace, surrounded by rock walls and ancient paths paved with bluestones. Fairy Little Xing, where is the exit? Chu Yingzhan's face was filled with distress. Her jade-like hands grabbed onto Yun Nuoxing's sleeves as he dragged her forward step by step. Her face was a bit tired. They had already been deep in the underground palace for nearly 3 days, but they still hadn't found the exit. This underground palace had been built into an underground maze. There were tunnels that extended in all directions, and there were even some walls that could be pushed open. Behind these walls was another tunnel. I don't know. Yun Nuoxing shook her head and sighed. Unless we took the wrong path from the beginning, we should be able to get out. It's just a matter of time. Chu Yingzhan frowned when she heard that. She was about to say something, but Yun Nuoxing sighed and said, Don't complain. I'm tired too. We can't replenish energy in the tomb. If it weren't for the fact that we have a strong foundation, we would have been drained. If you can't walk, do you want me to carry you? Yun Nuoxing sighed. She sounded tired. Xian's little face was also slightly gloomy. She didn't have much energy to speak. The energy in the underground maze was thirsty. They didn't know if it was because there was too little energy or something else, but in this underground palace, their strength was slowly decreasing. It might not be a problem for a while, but if it dragged on, they probably wouldn't be able to bear it. Who wants you to carry me? Chu Yingzhan muttered. She sighed and said, The underground palace is constantly draining our strength. If we can't get out in half a month, I will definitely become a dried corpse and become one of those skeletons. I don't want to be like that. Save some strength to walk. Yun Nuoxing looked at him speechlessly. She used a little strength to support Xian and said, Don't be too pessimistic. Since people can come in, they can definitely get out. Before we entered the maze, we saw some skeletons. When they fell, they were facing the direction of the hall. Maybe they walked in from outside the maze. I'm looking forward to seeing what Yang Qian and the others are doing. That way, I can determine the location. Even if we destroy this place, we can still get out. Yun Nuoxing looked up and said, But we don't know how deep this place is. It will be fun if it doesn't penetrate the ground. Yishi looked at him and couldn't help but say, The walls here are very hard. Even I can't do any damage. So, we only have one chance. Hearing this, Yun Nuoxing looked down at her and smiled gently. This smile also made Yi understand. Yun Nuoxing's all-out attack might be able to destroy the underground palace, but if he couldn't create an exit, although they wouldn't be buried underground, Yun Nuoxing, who couldn't replenish his strength, would definitely be unconscious. Then I will pray a little and see if those guys can find an exit, Chu Yingzhan mumbled. Yun Nuoxing smiled and didn't say anything. He was also praying, but the possibility of that happening wasn't very high. They walked for a long time in the underground maze. Yun Nuoxing suddenly stopped, causing Chu Yingzhan, who was walking almost unconsciously, to bump into him. Her small nose was pressed against his back. Chu Yingzhan came back to her senses and took a step back. She rubbed her small nose and stared at Yun Nuoxing unhappily. What are you doing? There's wind. Yun Nuoxing replied casually. He walked to the wall and touched it with his palm. Then, he knocked on the wall and said, There's wind, there's an echo. This place is hollow. Xiao Shi, come and help me. Yun Nuoxing called out to Yi Shi, then looked at the wall and said, "This underground maze is full of traces of man-made modification. Although this is already a relic from the Dark Age, it doesn't mean that there's nothing left. This might be a secret passage that leads to the exit." Yi Shi glanced at him, then nodded. She shouted softly and used all her strength to push the 3-meter-long stone wall to the side. Xian and the others were slightly happy when they saw that the wall was pushed open. However, they were stunned when they looked inside. "Are you sure this doesn't lead to the underworld?" Chu Yingzhan said quietly. Behind the cliff, an ancient passageway appeared. The walls were inlaid with a few eternal pearls, illuminating the passageway and allowing them to see the passageway clearly. For example, the sharp swords hanging above their heads, the huge spikes on the cliff, and the rows of sharp blades on the ground made this place look extremely terrifying. Yun Nuoxing glanced at her guiltily, then picked up a stone and threw it 6 or 7 meters away. It landed on the ground with a bang. Whoosh! Pooh! 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 Bang! As the stone fell, the passage in front of them was suddenly filled with arrows that turned into a rain of swords and flew everywhere. These arrows hit the wall and actually bounced to the side. The spikes hanging from the ceiling suddenly fell like rain. Even the wall was pierced, and arrows as thick as an arm shot out. They nailed the wall on the opposite side and shot out dense cracks. Looking at the passage that had suddenly become like a battlefield, the few of them fell silent. Yun Nuoxing's pretty face was also slightly pale. At this time, they were already a little weak. Moreover, these mechanisms were obviously not ordinary mechanisms. They were strange mechanisms that were used to target gods and even God. If they were hit, the consequences would be unimaginable. It's the blade-breaking arrow. The power of these arrows depends on the cultivation level of the person who made them. If it was made by a divine underworld expert, it would have a strong killing power against divine underworld experts. Similarly, the blade-breaking arrow made by a divine underworld expert would have the power to kill divine underworld expert. Yi Shi walked forward and picked up an arrow. She glanced at it and then said to Yun Nuoxing with lingering fear, "However, the craftsmanship of blade-breaking arrows is very complicated. If it could be mass-produced, almost anyone would be able to kill a godly emperor master." Yi Shi said and slowly put away the blade-breaking arrows on the ground. These were made by gods and were also a means to fight against enemies. Yun Nuoxing fell silent for a while, then suddenly laughed and said, "Look, the craftsmanship of the Dark Age is still not bad. After so many years, these mechanisms are still working. The owner of this maze is also quite diligent." After saying that, he also laughed dryly. Chu Yingzhan, Xian, and the others did not look at him. They just stared at him quietly with Mei Mao. Their stares made his hair stand on end. He quickly picked up another stone and threw it in front of the passage. However, this time, there was no movement when the stone fell to the ground. Chu Yingzhan thought that they could leave, so she wanted to take a step forward. However, Yun Nuoxing grabbed her arm. She was just about to ask what was wrong when Yun Nuoxing rolled her eyes at her. She picked up another stone and threw it in the same direction. Pooh! 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 Dang! When the third stone fell, a blazing blue flame suddenly spewed out of the tunnel. Then, a blade that was emitting a cold light and spanned across the entire tunnel fell from the sky, cleaving a smooth crack in the tunnel. Is this really not the way to the underworld? Even Yi Shi could not remain calm and could not help but ask. "I don't know. Don't ask me. I only know that there should be no problem this time." Yun Nuoxing smiled bitterly and shook his head. As if to prove that there was really nothing wrong, he took the lead and walked forward. Xian and the others were relieved. Even though the spikes that protruded from the rock wall looked terrifying, they felt that as long as they followed Yun Nuoxing, they would not be safe. Chu Yingzhan, on the other hand, hesitated for a while and muttered. She looked at Yun Nuoxing's back and followed him. She did not dare to stay here alone at this time. They crossed the mechanisms without any danger and walked for a long time in the passage. Then, a huge stone room appeared in front of Yun Nuoshing and the others, startling them. There was nothing in the huge stone chamber. There was only a huge magic formation carved on the ground. This magic formation was different from the magic formation that Yun Nuo knew. The lines in the magic formation passed through the two energy matrix lines that circled the canvas and extended to the outside. This is an alchemy array from the Dark Age. Yun Nuoshing and Yi Shi exclaimed at the same time when they saw the huge array carved on the ground. Alchemy arrays can be used depending on the array. This one in front of us. Let me take a look. Yun Nuoshing explained softly to Xian and the others. Then, he sized up the alchemy array seriously. Before he could see through it completely, Yi Shi spoke first. This alchemy array can create weapons out of thin air. Although the quality will not be top-notch, and it cannot be preserved forever, it can create endless divine weapons. Looking at its grade, the weapons created will probably be comparable to level 9 divine weapons. To be more specific, they should be level 9 divine weapons. It's a pity that it can't really go against level 9 divine weapons. Otherwise, this alchemy array would be heaven-defying. Yun Nuoshing sighed. He was also a little whimsical. If this alchemy array could really create divine weapons that were comparable to level 9 divine weapons, then forging skills would be meaningless. However, even though it couldn't go head-to-head with a divine level 9 divine artifact, it wouldn't be a problem to go head-to-head with a divine level 8 divine artifact. Moreover, its greatest value should be its ability to be mass-produced. Even though it couldn't be stored for too long, it wouldn't be a problem for it to last for a battle. If it was used in an army, it would be equivalent to equipping an army with an unlimited number of divine level 9 divine artifacts. Yun Nuoshing and Yi Shi looked at each other, then released their soul power without saying a word. No matter what, they had to remember it first. This was the civilization's heritage from the Dark Age, something that did not exist in this era. Seeing their actions, Feng Er and the others also knew what they were doing. They looked at the three women and spread out in this stone room. Most of their gazes were focused on the side of the stone room. There was a flight of stairs that led to the top, but the top of the stairs was blocked by some gravel. If there was no accident, that should be the exit. Phew. This is the exit, right? I want to rest for a while. Chu Yingzhan wiped the sweat off her pretty face. They had been walking around for the past few days, and they could not recover their strength in the maze, so they had suffered a little. After about 4 or 5 minutes, Yun Nuoshing and Yi Shi opened their eyes. They did not immediately comprehend it, but just engraved it. After all, alchemy arrays and ordinary arrays were somewhat different, and they could only know how to operate after studying it. After engraving this alchemy array, the two stood up and looked at the stairs. Then, Yun Nuoshing smiled at Xian and the others. Let's go, I hope this is the exit. Yi Shi rolled her eyes at him. Could he not say such frightening things at this time? However, she did not delay. Her small white hands shrank into her wide sleeves, and she smashed the huge rock in front of her into pieces. Suddenly, a dazzling silver-blue light shone in. This light was like the sun being seen through the clouds. It was so dazzling that the few of them found it very dazzling. Along with the light, a majestic power surged in, making them all breathe a sigh of relief. After their eyes adjusted to the light, Yun Nuoshing and the others stepped on the stairs. After coming out of the stairs, they arrived in front of a dilapidated ruin. The silver-blue spatial crack was still flowing in the sky. Phew, we're out, we're out. Seeing the silver-blue flowing space, Yun Nuoshing also breathed a sigh of relief. These 3 days in the underground maze had made him dizzy. Why are you all here? Yun Nuoshing and the others had just come out of the underground when they heard a somewhat familiar startled voice. They froze for a moment and turned their heads. Then, they saw that not far away, Yang Qian and the others were staring at them in a daze. Chapter 758. Our group either died or scattered. It wasn't easy for us to find this ancient city. We came in to explore it, but we couldn't leave. Although this city is very big, more than 80% of it is in ruins. Only the skyward monument in front of us is relatively intact, but we can't understand a single word on it. Yang Qian sighed helplessly and briefly explained the situation to Yun Nuoxing. Yun Nuoxing seemed to understand something. The tomb they came out of was under the city. They had walked for several days without encountering any spatial distortion. It was likely that the entire city and the tomb below were protected by a force, preventing them from being affected by spatial rift. The skyward monument records the major events that happened in this city. Unfortunately, the words on it are very ancient. They should be words from the Dark Age, said Yang Qian as he pointed at the stone monument not far away. Let me take a look. Yun Nuoxing's interest was piqued when he heard that. He walked towards the skyward monument. It was a 30-foot-long stone monument that was only a meter tall and wide. It was placed in the middle of the ancient city ruins. The ancient words reflected a faint light under the silver-blue space. The blood-red words seemed to be written with cinnabar. Upon seeing the blood-red words, Yun Nuoxing frowned slightly. He extended his finger and gently stroked it. His fingertip was dyed red. He sniffed his fingertip and his expression changed slightly. This is blood. Everyone's expression changed slightly as well. They heard Yun Nuoxing continue, to be able to flow from the Dark Age without drying up, this is the divine blood of a deity. Yun Nuoxing looked at the gaps between the blood-red words and reached out to wipe away the dust. What was revealed were blurry words. The deity who wrote this wanted to leave something behind to inform future generations. He covered up the original contents of the skyward monument and used the indestructible divine blood to leave behind eternal words. This should be a very important matter. Otherwise, he wouldn't have covered up the entire skyward monument's contents and only left behind the blood words. Yun Nuoxing walked forward slowly and reached the front of the skyward monument. However, he was still a little distressed when he saw the words. These were not words from the mythological era. He could not understand them. Furthermore, Ziyi could not understand them either. In other words, these were words from the true Dark Era. The eternal divine blood has lost its divine power. Although it can't affect us, we can't read it with our divine sense. This is the authentic language of the Dark Age. Yun Nuoxing turned to look at the crowd and shook his head with a sigh. He was also helpless in this situation. Yun Nuoxing turned his head around, only to see Chu Yingzhan's beautiful eyes filled with anticipation as she looked at him. That expression of anticipation caused her eyes to sparkle incomparably, causing Yun Nuoxing to be stunned. What was wrong with this girl? Cough. Chu Yingzhan coughed dryly. Everyone turned to look at her, thinking that she was about to make a big announcement. Chu Yingzhan raised her chin at Yun Nuoxing. There was a playful look on her face, which made him a little speechless. After thinking for a while, he asked tentatively, Could it be that you know the language of the Dark Age? Chu Yingzhan grinned. In this strange place, her smile seemed to be contagious. Everyone could not help but relax a little. So that's how it is. Yun Nuoxing was speechless. Only now did he realize that she had been saying all this time. Wasn't she just waiting for him to take the initiative to speak? Then, I'll have to ask Fairy Chu to help everyone take a look at what's written on it. Chu Yingzhan chuckled and ran cheerfully to Yun Nuoxing's side. She twisted her waist and pushed him to the side with her butt. She occupied the front position and bent down to carefully look at the words on it. After being pushed, Yun Nuoxing looked at her with hidden bitterness. However, he did not say anything and retreated to the side. After a long time, Chu Yingzhan looked from the right end of the skyward monument to the left end. She took in the few lines of words. Then, she stretched her neck and looked up at the sky, seemingly deep in thought. After a while, The few young men beside Yang Qian could not help but ask, Fairy Chu, do you understand what's written on it? Chu Yingzhan nodded. However, she still looked up at the sky, as if she was organizing her thoughts. After a while, even Yun Nuoxing could not hold it in anymore. She slowly opened her small mouth and said, Let me explain it in my own words. Back then, the clansmen of this city all left the God realm and went deep into the star field to find their home planet. In the end, they couldn't find it and lost the method to return to the God realm. They drifted through the star field and finally settled down in a desolate world in the starry sky. And, before this god died, he wrote these words and then exiled himself into the starry sky, praying that he would be able to drift back to the God realm. Chu Yingzhan slowly said. What? Yang Qian and the others were stunned. After Yun Nuoxing heard this, he was also a little stunned. That's it. That's it. Chu Yingzhan nodded seriously. Then, she looked at the skyward monument again and said, That's right. That's it. This fairy can vouch for it. So this place was not originally in the realm of the gods. It accidentally fell from the sky and crashed into the Sky Illusion mountain range? Yang Qian asked in astonishment. They had just deduced some secrets about the Dark Age, but in the end it was completely unrelated? The skyward monument. At least, that's what this passage says. The content that was originally covered up is no longer clear. Chu Yingzhan nodded. Then, she said, if what this god wrote is true, then this world should be in a distant galaxy. Moreover, it should be a very, very long distance away from the realm of the gods. I don't know what happened to make it fall into the realm of the gods. She didn't say anything else because it would make her hair stand on end. Before they entered, Yun Nuoxing and Yi Shi had deduced that this place should have descended through a large-scale spatial transfer. Moreover, it had happened nearly 10 million years ago. However, the traces left behind in this place should be from that era. At the very least, they hadn't discovered any traces left behind from this era. It didn't mention why this place appeared in a crack in time, nor did it mention how this place came to the realm of the gods. And that thing just now? Yun Nuoxing was confused. He kept feeling that something was wrong. He said the last sentence through voice transmission. Many things were involved in the tomb below, so he didn't want to reveal it. He would rather it be buried forever. Moreover, he had a naughty thought. If that god didn't float back to the realm of the gods in the end, what would he think if he found out that the city he originally lived in had unexpectedly ended up in the realm of the gods? There's really nothing left. This fairy can guarantee it, Chu Yingzhan pouted. She was a little angry that Yun Nuoxing didn't believe her. She snorted softly. Seeing her insistence, Yun Nuoxing didn't ask any more questions. Although they hadn't known each other for long, he trusted Chu Yingzhan to a large extent. He didn't want to think too much about whether she was hiding something from him. In the ruined city, a group of people wandered around aimlessly, digging up the collapsed buildings. Although they were digging up, these decayed buildings were basically crumbling at the slightest touch. It didn't take much effort to clean them up. The space in the crack in time is extremely unstable. Even if there's some kind of power that has preserved this city, it doesn't mean that it won't be eroded. This protective measure doesn't seem to be as well preserved as the rain country that Big Brother Nuo and you've seen. The buildings there only look like they've been there for a long time, but they're not as decayed as here, Yi Shi said as she stood on the roof and looked at the collapsed buildings around her. Didn't you say that this is a mystery realm? Yun Nuoxing couldn't help but mutter. But this is clearly a ruin of a ruined city. I'm not taking the blame for this. I'm not taking the blame. If you want to blame someone, blame those records. I've never seen it with my own eyes. I've only heard of this sky fantasy mountain range, Yi Shi muttered. Then, she said, speaking of which, that Yang Qian is the more suspicious one, isn't he? Why would he have the key to open the crack in time here? He said that he bought it from the black market. As for whether it's true or not, I don't know. I'm too lazy to verify it. Let's just take it that he's telling the truth." Yun Nuoxing shook her head. The group rummaged through the south side of this ruined city, while Yang Qian and the others went to the north side. If they didn't discover anything on this trip, and didn't obtain anything of value, then it would be a huge loss. Moreover, they still had to find a way out now. Could it be that in the tomb? Yi Shi couldn't help but mutter. However, before she could finish, she was interrupted by Yun Nuoxing. "Don't mention that place. I'd rather lay in bed for half a year and use the Netheruin's sword to cut open the entire space than go in there again." Yun Nuoxing shuddered. Her resistance made Xian and the others not know whether to laugh or cry. However, they really did find something after a carpet search. There weren't many buildings around this spacious land. It seemed very empty, as if it was the residence of some rich family. And on the collapsed boulders, Yun Nuoxing discovered that there were fist-sized round crystals embedded there. However, the crystals themselves didn't interest Yun Nuoxing and the others. These are memory crystals. In ancient times, they were used to record all sorts of things in mystic arts. Yi Shi crouched down in surprise and touched the crystals. She was surprised that the 6 round crystals hadn't disappeared in the torrent of time. They had been preserved after so much time. Memory crystals are very fragile. Ordinary people can shatter them with a hammer. However, they are very durable. When other things have decayed, they might not have disappeared. I just didn't expect that after so many eras, they still haven't disappeared. Furthermore, the mystic arts inside have been preserved completely. Yi Shi said in surprise. These are 6 post-divine mystic arts. Divine grade, sacred grade. As expected, these are the grades of post-divine mystic arts. Only now did Yun Nuoxing understand that the fire of the soul she saw back then was of the same grade as these 6. They were all post-divine mystic arts. What? Let me see. Hearing that, Chu Yingzhan excitedly jumped up. She threw the eaves in her hand several hundred meters away and ran over to Yun Nuoxing's side. She excitedly knelt down and looked at the crystals. Yun Nuoxing glanced at her and jokingly said, "I know you're excited, but there's no need to be so courteous. Get up." Chu Yingzhan glared at him. Without saying anything, her soul power drilled out from between her eyebrows and rushed into the first crystal. She carefully examined it. Yun Nuoxing didn't mind. The memory crystal could be read many times and wouldn't disappear just because it was read once. At this moment, he was also carefully looking at these mystic arts. Xian and the others were urged by Yi Shi and hurriedly put down what they were doing. They sat together and used their soul power to read the contents of the memory crystal. Among the few of them, Yun Nuoxing was the one who learned the most divine-grade mystic art. Even though Yi Shi was a God-Emperor expert, the resources in her hands weren't as terrifying as Yun Nuoxing's. She didn't even have a divine-grade mystic art. The only thing that could be considered a divine-grade mystic art was the soul-burning art she obtained from Yun Nuoxing. As she advanced into the God-Emperor realm, it also advanced to the divine grade. There was also the flame demon burning heaven art that she hadn't fully comprehended yet. Although she hadn't fully comprehended it, she felt that it should be a divine grade mystic art. The advantage of being used to a divine grade mystic art was that it allowed him to fully comprehend it in the shortest amount of time. Although he didn't plan to cultivate and comprehend it on the spot, it would save him a lot of effort to record it down based on his experience. However, after reading it, he frowned. At this moment, there was a ball of bright light flickering in Yun Nuoxing's soul. This was the mystic art that he had just read from the memory crystal. It was like a sun hanging in his mind. It was extremely dazzling, but it made Ziyi complain. "It's too bright. I'm sleeping." Ziyi scratched her hair anxiously on the bed. She turned over and buried her head in the quilt. Lan Xian, and Kai Xia, who were beside her, didn't know what to say. Yun Nuoshing smiled bitterly and quickly blocked the light. Then, he frowned and looked at the ball of information. He was somewhat puzzled. The cultivation method in the Age of Darkness seems to be different from now? Yun Nuoshing murmured. Although an ordinary mystic art might not be very helpful to the cultivation of the elements, it would more or less mention that in the realm of the gods, the cultivation of the elements was the most important thing. It was even more important than one's own cultivation. However, this mystic art from the Age of Darkness didn't have any cultivation method related to the elements. Don't you think it's very strange? Hearing a charming laugh, Yun Nuoshing raised his head and saw that Chu Yingzhan had unknowingly woken up. Her eyes were smiling and curved like two crescent moons. Besides himself, Chu Yingzhan was the first to wake up. This made Yun Nuoshing a little surprised. He originally thought that Yi Shi would be the first to wake up. He didn't expect her to be the first to wake up. If you want to say it, just say it. Seeing that this girl was keeping him in suspense, Yun Nuoshing said indifferently. If he showed a curious look at this time, this girl would probably show off. Sure enough, seeing Yun Nuoshing's indifferent look, the interest on Chu Yingzhan's pretty face instantly disappeared. She couldn't help but glare at him and said coquettishly, "Bad guy. Can't you show a little curiosity and satisfy my vanity?" Yun Nuoshing tilted his head and smiled bitterly. Then, he said seriously, "I'm very curious. TSK." Chu Yingzhan rolled her eyes at Yun Nuoshing's forceful attitude. However, she didn't make a fuss about it at this time. She looked at the 6 crystals and said seriously, "The cultivation of the Age of Darkness is not the same as our current cultivation. Our current cultivation is to let the elements fuse with our body and soul. However, in that ancient era, these were all independent. One's own cultivation is one's own cultivation, while the cultivation of the elements is measured by another system. The two are completely unrelated. It is also because of this reason that in the cultivation of the Age of Darkness, one's own cultivation and the elements are separated. The elements have their own special cultivation method. The few that we saw should be used to increase one's own cultivation." Hearing this, Yun Nuoshing opened his mouth in surprise. He didn't expect the cultivation method of the past to be so different from the present. He really didn't know what had happened in these few eras. Chapter 759. Millions of years have passed, and new life has been born from the ruins. A sapling has sprouted from the bones in the ruins, and sparks have been reignited in the starry sky. The desolate starry sky is filled with the aura of life once again. Starlight hangs high on the boundless shore. Under the collapsed wall, there was a withered tree trunk. Perhaps it was a kind of intuition, but Yun Nuoshing casually lifted the low wall and found a paragraph of text left on the tree trunk. They were all very experienced. After recording the 6 profound techniques, they did not sit on the spot to comprehend them. They knew that it was not the time yet. What surprised Yun Nuoshing was that among the 6 profound techniques, there was an elemental profound technique. Unfortunately, it was a gold elemental profound technique. Among the 7 of them, none of them had the gold element. Chu Yingzhan had the wind element. When he found out, Yun Nuoshing even joked about it. No wonder she always had a floating temperament. If I'm not wrong, this should have been left behind at the beginning of the Supreme Ancient Era. At that time, the Age of Darkness had just become a thing of the past, and the Great Samsara had ended. Ziyi whispered in Yun Nuoshing's mind. "Hey, this is strange. It's always said that no life can cross an era. Look at this, what is this, huh? Why do I find that there are so many life forms that have crossed the imprisonment of an era?" Yun Nuoshing's face was filled with black lines. The common sense he saw was overturned again and again. He did not know what was true anymore. According to common sense, this is indeed the case. I'm not lying to you. However, there are always some life forms that break the restraints of common sense. Otherwise, how do you think those ruins and ancient legends in the realm of the gods were left behind? Ziyi rolled his eyes and said, when the gods reach a certain level of strength, they can naturally cross the transition of eras. It's just that it's not clear if their lifespan has crossed the limit. The lifespan of the gods is very long, but not as long as you think. Then how long is it? Yun Nuoshing rolled his eyes. At least 7 or 8 eras, at most a dozen eras. As for the gods, I don't know, Ziyi said. So even now, you're still unwilling to tell me what the Great Samsara is? Yun Nuoshing sighed helplessly. He was very curious about what this Great Samsara was, but Ziyi, the only person who knew about it, kept it from him. What's the use of telling you? Should I tell you that I actually don't know either? Ziyi grumbled bitterly. He had already asked this question a few thousand times. Huh! Yun Nuoshing widened her eyes in astonishment. No, didn't you already know? You always tell me about the aura of the Great Samsara and how many times it will happen. How come you don't know? Ziyi rolled his eyes and took a sip of tea. He said helplessly, I know about the aura of the Great Samsara because of Ing. At that time, he brought me all over the place and saw some ancient ruins. He told me about the aura of the Great Samsara. As for why I can recognize what it looks like after the Great Samsara, he also told me about it. In fact, although I've been through 3 Great Samsara since the late stage of the ancient antiquity era, I was sleeping during each Great Samsara. I've never seen what happened during the Great Samsara with my own eyes. Hearing this answer, Yun Nuoshing felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He felt inexplicably anxious and wanted to rush into Ziyi's soul to grab him and smack his butt. So he didn't even know about it and had used all kinds of excuses to fool him for such a long time. Wouldn't it have been better if you said you didn't know in the beginning? You made me think about it for such a long time. Yun Nuoshing smiled bitterly. What was this? But it's not like I don't know it all. I know a little about it. Ziyi muttered. Fine, fine, fine. You win. I lose. Yun Nuoshing's mouth twitched. What was the difference between knowing a little and not knowing? After bickering with Ziyi for a while, Yun Nuoshing finally came back to his senses. When he saw Chu Yingzhan in deep thought, his heart couldn't help but skip a beat. He asked, You? Fairy Chu Yingzhan, do you know what the Great Samsara is? Chu Yingzhan looked up when her thoughts were interrupted. Mei Mao blinked and looked at him. She shook her head and said, I don't know. What is the Great Samsara? It's nothing. When he asked that question, Yun Nuoshing was a little anxious. How would she know such a thing? Even if her background wasn't small, it was unlikely that she would know such a thing. What are you talking about? You whet the appetites of others and you just let it go like this. You're a person who abandons others after seducing them. Chu Yingzhan furrowed her brows, lightly snorted, and said something that made Yun Nuoshing go crazy. However, he couldn't be bothered to reply. Bickering with a girl was the worst choice. If you said one sentence, she would reply 10 or 20 times. After searching the area for a while and turning over the ground, they didn't find anything. After leaving the most eye-catching energy mark, they left. After that, Yun Nuoshing and the others flew towards the largest building in the south, which was the city lord's mansion. After searching for so long, they knew that most of the wealth in the city was probably in the hands of the big families. They searched the small families just now to try their luck. Who said that small families didn't have treasures? The spacious area of the city lord's mansion was very spacious, but it was filled with densely packed words. There were as many words as the sand in the sea. It was unknown how complicated the words were, but one thing was for sure. Such complicated handwriting must have come from the hands of a god. This is... What are they deducing? What are they calculating? Seeing the densely packed words, Yun Nuoshing's heart skipped a beat. These deduced symbols and words were not written using ordinary means. The words here were the same as those on the skyward monument. They were all written with the blood of the god. Every stroke. He seemed to be able to imagine that in this spacious place, each and every god was sprinkling their own blood essence, trying to deduce a result. The gods who had left their blood essence here must have been very powerful. He didn't know what it was that made them so focused, even willing to release their blood essence for future generations to observe. These deductions were made by at least 6 gods. Yishi pointed at a few places where the symbols and handwriting were a bit different. There were as many symbols as the stars in the sky, and they were the work of the 6 godly spirits. Furthermore, at the end of the symbols, there was no conclusion written at the end. It was as if the calculations were not over, and there was no conclusion. Chu Yingzhan blinked at Mei Mao and stared motionlessly at the symbols. The blood-red symbols seemed to come alive in her eyes. They kept changing forms, as if they were going to rush out of the ground and crash into her. That one glance seemed to make her fall into eternal stillness. She seemed to be able to see the destruction of stars and the fall of ancient stars. It was as if she was wandering in the endless galaxy, lost in time, and lost herself. Hey! A sudden shout made her delicate body tremble. She quickly came back to her senses. When she looked at the blood-red words on the ground again, there was no movement. The strange scene had also disappeared. Chu Yingzhan turned her head in a daze and saw Yun Nuoxing grabbing her shoulder with a serious expression. She asked in confusion, "What happened to me just now? You almost died. Just a little bit more and your soul would have ascended to heaven," she said casually, but there was a serious expression on her little face. How can the deductions left behind by the gods be comprehended so easily? If you're not careful, you might have directly fallen into the cycle of reincarnation. Yun Nuoxing put down her hand and looked at the densely packed words with lingering fear. Reincarnation? That's right, it's reincarnation. It felt like I entered a reincarnation. It wasn't the reincarnation of life, but it was a very clear feeling. Chu Yingzhan was stunned. She seemed to understand something, but she didn't seem to understand. Her little mouth couldn't stop muttering. Reincarnation? Yun Nuoxing murmured. He looked at the area full of words and symbols and asked in confusion, could it be that these gods are calculating reincarnation? Seeing his expression as if he had made a decision, Yishi's heart thumped. She quickly stood in front of him and blocked his way. Brother Nuo, don't do anything rash. Yun Nuoxing smiled. He squatted down and rubbed her head. I cultivate the 6 paths of reincarnation. Let's take a look. It should be fine. If something happens, Shao Shi, wake me up. If you can't, then beat me up. Xian also wanted to say something, but when she saw his determined expression, she obediently shut her mouth. They all knew that once this guy decided on something, even 9 gods wouldn't be able to pull him back, let alone 9 cows. Yishi bit her red lips. After a while, she nodded sullenly. She turned to the side and made way for him. She couldn't help but reach out and slap Yun Nuoxing's stomach. Yun Nuoxing smiled and walked to the front. He stared at it without blinking. In his eyes, there was a hint of reincarnation, so that he wouldn't fall into reincarnation like Chu Yingzhan. He looked very seriously from the beginning to the end, but it was too difficult and profound. Moreover, he couldn't understand these words and symbols. He could only guess from the artistic conception. This was the theory of the gods' deduction. It wasn't something that people at his level could understand. Even if he cultivated the 6 paths of reincarnation, even if he had the spiritual godly body, it was the same. Xian and the others. Mei Mao stared at Yun Nuoxing's face without blinking. If anything happened to him, they would rush out in an instant and call Yun Nuoxing back. Yun Nuoxing slowly tried to figure it out. He didn't know if it was because of the 6 paths of reincarnation, but when he looked at these symbols, although he didn't feel like he could see through them completely, he could understand what the gods were doing. This was a very strange state. Unknowingly, he moved like this and watched without sleeping. Almost in the blink of an eye, 5 days passed. It was obvious how much effort was put into this deduction. The god's blood didn't leave a drop of god power, but it emitted a will, an indestructible will. Even after several eras and dozens of eras, it wasn't destroyed. Even when the essence chi disappeared and the god's body perished, the god's blood still flowed proudly here. On the way, Yi Shi drove Xian and the others to other places to search. It was also a waste of time for them to stay here and look after Yun Nuoxing. However, Xian stubbornly stayed and pushed Feng Er, Little Bing Er, and Chu Yingzhan out. This made the 3 girls feel a little helpless. After hesitating for a while, they also sighed and rushed to other places. It was indeed a waste of time to stay together, but they also wanted to stay. Seeing Yun Nuoxing immersed in that strange state, Feng Er was very worried. When the 5th day was about to end, Yun Nuoxing came to the end. The unfinished deduction had stopped here in the end. He didn't know what happened back then that forced him to stop and didn't continue. Feng Er and the others also came back. They had been away for too long, so they felt uneasy. When the 3 of them came back, Yun Nuoxing came back to his senses and stared at the end with his eyes wide open. Although he still couldn't understand those symbols, there was a line of words left there. Those were the words of the gods. We have fallen into the prison of fate. Who would have thought that everything was wrong from the beginning? We wanted to escape from our predetermined fate, but we fell into an even greater fate. Yun Nuoxing was lost in thought. These were the words left behind by the 6th god. He didn't know what they thought of when they were deducing. This should be the final result of this long deduction, an unfinished result. Reincarnation. Reincarnation. Everything is fake. Everything is fake in the end. We can't escape from this prison in the end. Yun Nuoxing's heartstrings trembled. What were these gods calculating? Weren't they calculating reincarnation? He believed in the existence of reincarnation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have practiced the 6 paths of reincarnation technique. Moreover, Feng Yuing, the existence of his previous life, had proven the existence of reincarnation to him. However, why did he feel that something was wrong? Speaking of which, what was reincarnation? Was the reincarnation that he knew about the reincarnation of the Great Tao? Yun Nuoxing wasn't sure either. This secret had been passed down since the ancient mythological era until now, and there had never been a positive answer. 6 paths of reincarnation technique. Yun Nuoxing looked at the bottom. There was actually a heart sutra left behind there. Moreover, this heart sutra was the same as the one he practiced. No wonder I felt a sense of familiarity when I looked at it. So it's this. The deductions left behind here are all related to reincarnation, but they're all incomplete. The 6 paths of reincarnation technique that I practice is complete. In other words, the deduction here is the beginning of the 6 paths of reincarnation technique. Later on, someone perfected it and spread it out. That's how the complete 6 paths of reincarnation technique is now. Yun Nuoxing's bright eyes flickered slightly as a bold guess appeared in his heart. This is the 6 paths of reincarnation technique that Brother Nuo practices? Yi Shi, who was listening from the side, was also a little surprised and doubtful. Ever since she found out that Yun Nuoxing practiced the 6 paths of reincarnation technique on the Xianlong continent, she had investigated it after returning. However, she didn't find anything particularly noteworthy. The only possibility she knew was that the 6 paths of reincarnation technique was related to the legendary reincarnation emperor. The 6 paths of reincarnation technique left behind by the ancestors is enough to see through reincarnation and enter it with one's body. However, one doesn't want to disappear in time. When one wants to use reincarnation to escape, it's already too late. I only hope that the incomplete 6 paths of reincarnation technique can allow the descendants to escape from here. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.